Hello everyone, and welcome to the World War Photographer channel. Today we will dive into fascinating World War II photo stories. Don't forget to subscribe to support our work. It truly means a lot to us. Adolf Hitler, age 35, photographed on December 20th, 1924, after his release from Landsberg prison. Convicted of treason for the 1923 Beer Hall Putsch, he had just finished dictating Mein Kampf to Rudolf Hess. 8 years later, in 1933, he would become Chancellor of Germany. A Japanese soldier guards a section of the Great Wall of China in 1937 during the Second Sino-Japanese War. Although tensions between Japan and China had simmered since 1931, full-scale conflict erupted in 1937. Japanese aircraft execute a bombing run over targets in China in 1937, marking a significant escalation in the Second Sino-Japanese War. The bombings caused widespread devastation and civilian casualties. Japanese soldiers engage in intense street fighting in Shanghai, China, in 1937 during the Battle of Shanghai. Spanning from August to November, the battle involved nearly 1 million troops and led to over 150,000 combined casualties before the city fell to Japanese forces. The first images of Japanese troops occupying Peiping on August 13, 1937, show soldiers marching under the Rising Sun banner through Chenmen, the main gate to the Tartar city and the Forbidden City. Nearby, the American embassy became a refuge for US residents during the height of Sino-Japanese hostilities. Chinese General Chiang Kai-shek, leader of the Nanking government, is pictured with General Lung Yun, chairman of the Yunnan provincial government, in Nanking on June 27, 1936. Buddhist priests from the Big Asakusa Temple in Tokyo, Japan, wear gas masks during training for aerial attacks on May 30, 1936, as tensions of the Second Sino-Japanese War escalate. Italian fascist leader Benito Mussolini stands with party members in Rome on October 28, 1922, after the March on Rome. This act of intimidation by fascist blackshirts led King Victor Emmanuel III to invite Mussolini to form a government, paving the way for his dictatorship. 4 Italian soldiers take aim in Ethiopia during the Second Italo-Abyssinian War in 1935. Under Mussolini's orders, Italy invaded and annexed Ethiopia, merging it with Eritrea to form the colony of Italian East Africa. Italian troops hoist their flag over Mekelle, Ethiopia, in 1935. Despite Emperor Haile Selassie's pleas to the League of Nations, no significant aid was offered, allowing Italy to proceed unchecked in its East African conquest. In Spain, on June 2, 1937, Loyalist soldiers instruct women in target practice as they prepare to defend Barcelona against the fascist rebel troops of General Francisco Franco during the Spanish Civil War. On March 19, 1938, in Madrid, Spain, an explosion under the 5-story Casablanca building killed 300 fascist insurgents. Government loyalists had tunneled 600 yards over 6 months to plant the landmine that triggered the blast. On September 12, 1936, in Burgos, Spain, an insurgent fighter throws a hand grenade over a barbed wire fence towards loyalist soldiers who are firing machine guns in response. On May 30, 1939, German-made Stuka dive bombers from the Condor Legion fly over Spain during the Spanish Civil War. The black and white X on their tails represents Franco's Nationalist Air Force. On December 9, 1936, families seek shelter underground on a Madrid subway platform as bombs fall from Franco's rebel aircraft. In 1938, Franco's Nationalist Air Force carried out aerial bombings on Barcelona marking some of the earliest use of terror bombing techniques on civilian targets during the Spanish Civil War. After an aerial attack on Madrid by 16 rebel planes from Tetuan, Spanish Morocco, on January 8, 1937, women, fearing for their loved ones trapped in the ruins, anxiously await news. Their expressions reflect the immense suffering of civilians caught in the Civil War. A Spanish rebel who surrendered is escorted to a summary court-martial on July 27, 1936, in Madrid, Spain, while Popular Front volunteers and civil guards jeer at him. On December 30, 1936, a fascist machine gun squad, supported by skilled riflemen, defends a position along the rugged Huesca front in northern Spain. On September 3, 1939, President Franklin D. Roosevelt pledged U.S. neutrality in a radio address, following Congress's Neutrality Acts. Rita Khan drives an ambulance in Los Angeles on September 18, 1937, part of the Hollywood Caravan to Spain, raising funds to support Spanish democracy during the Civil War. Two American Nazis stand in the doorway of their New York City office on April 1, 1932, when the headquarters opened. The NSDAP refers to the National Socialist German Workers' Party, or Nazi Party. A peaceful ranch in Boise City, Oklahoma, is about to be engulfed by a massive dust cloud during the Dust Bowl on April 15, 1935. Severe drought, poor farming practices, and storms turned millions of acres of farmland barren. Florence Thompson and her 3 children, captured in the iconic Migrant Mother photograph, taken by Dorothea Lange in early 1936 in Nipomo, California. This image became a symbol of hardship during the Great Depression. The Hindenburg Zeppelin passes the Empire State Building over Manhattan on August 8, 1936, en route to Lakehurst, New Jersey. It would tragically explode in a fireball over Lakehurst on May 6, 1937. On March 16, 1938, 2,000 volunteers in Birmingham participated in England's largest gas attack readiness drill. These firemen were fully equipped, from rubber boots to gas masks, for the mock gas invasion. On June 14, 1934, Adolf Hitler and Benito Mussolini greeted each other at an airfield in Venice, Italy. Mussolini's fascists staged a display for Hitler, but little information was revealed about their private discussions. In March 1933, 4 Nazi troops sang in front of the Berlin Woolworth-Commerce store as part of a movement to boycott Jewish presence in Germany. The Nazi regime believed the Woolworth Company founder was Jewish. At the Berlin Radio Exhibition on August 19, 1932, the Nazi booth showcased propaganda for the Nazi gramophone industry, which produced records solely promoting the National Socialist movement. On September 11, 1935, in Nuremberg, Germany, thousands of young men gathered to listen to Adolf Hitler, Reichsführer, as he addressed the National Socialist Party convention. On November 9, 1933, Adolf Hitler is seen riding through the streets of Munich, Germany, as he is cheered by crowds celebrating the 10th anniversary of the National Socialist movement. On August 27, 1933, members of the Hitler Youth honor an unknown soldier by forming a swastika symbol in Germany. On October 4, 1935, the German army showcased its strength at the nationwide Harvest Festival in Bückeburg, near Hanover. Hundreds of tanks were lined up for the demonstration, marking a defiance of the Treaty of Versailles as Germany rapidly rearmed after Hitler's rise to power in 1933. On July 9, 1932, thousands of Germans gathered in Berlin for the Great National Socialist Meeting, a significant event reflecting the growing influence of the Nazi Party in Germany. On February 24, 1936, a group of German girls lined up in Berlin to learn musical culture as part of the Nazi youth movement's efforts to promote Nazi ideology and discipline among the youth. On September 10, 1935, the Nazi Party convention took place in Nuremberg, Germany, showcasing the growing influence and power of Adolf Hitler and the National Socialist Party. On August 11, 1936, Jesse Owens of the United States saluted after winning the gold medal in the long jump at the Berlin Olympics, defeating Nazi Germany's Lutz Long, who placed second. Owens went on to win 4 gold medals, making history as the first athlete to achieve such a feat in a single Olympic Games. On September 24, 1938, British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain returned to London after meeting with Adolf Hitler in Germany. He brought with him the terms of the Munich Agreement, which allowed Germany to annex Czechoslovakia's Sudetenland in an act of appeasement, aiming to avoid war. On April 30, 1938, members of the Nazi youth in Salzburg took part in the public burning of books. These books, deemed un-German or Jewish Marxist, were condemned by the Nazi regime as part of their campaign to suppress ideas and literature considered harmful to their ideology. On September 8, 1938, Nuremberg, Germany, hosted a Day of Community event, where mass gymnastics demonstrations were a prominent feature. Adolf Hitler observed these large-scale displays, which took place at the Zeppelin Field, showcasing the power and unity of the Nazi regime. On November 10, 1938, during Kristallnacht, Jewish-owned shops in Berlin were destroyed by SA stormtroopers and civilians, leaving streets covered in broken glass. 91 Jews were killed, and 30,000 Jewish men were arrested. On August 13, 1939, the Rheinmetall Borsig factory in Düsseldorf produced gun barrels. German factories quickly scaled up, eventually building over 25,000 fighter planes in 1944. On March 14, 1938, in Vienna, a workman installs a new nameplate, renaming a city square Adolf Hitler Place as Austria prepares for Hitler's arrival. A view of an undamaged Polish city from the cockpit of a German Heinkel A111P bomber in 1939. A Polish cavalry squadron on maneuvers in Poland on April 29, 1939. The myth of Polish cavalry charging against Nazi tanks was fueled by Nazi and Soviet propaganda, though cavalry primarily targeted infantry and had effective charges. Associated Press correspondent Alvin Steinkopf, broadcasting from Danzig on July 11th. The city, a semi-autonomous state tied to Poland, was under tension as Germany demanded its incorporation into the Third Reich, hinting at possible military action. Soviet Premier Joseph Stalin smiles as Soviet Foreign Minister Vyacheslav Molotov signs the Non-Aggression Pact with German Foreign Minister Joachim von Ribbentrop in Moscow on August 23, 1939. The pact secretly divided Eastern Europe into spheres of influence, ensuring no Soviet resistance if Hitler invaded Poland, bringing war closer. On August 25th, Great Britain formed a military alliance with Poland. Just days later, on September 1st, the German battleship Schleswig-Holstein bombed a Polish transit depot at Westerplatte, marking the beginning of World War II. The Luftwaffe and German ground troops also launched simultaneous attacks across Poland. On September 7, 1939, German soldiers combed the Westerplatte after its surrender to German forces. Less than 200 Polish defenders held the peninsula for 7 days before yielding to the attack. German bombers targeted Poland in a devastating aerial attack, with explosions marking the impact of the bombs on the ground. This marked a brutal start to World War II. 2 tanks from the SS Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler Division crossed the Bzura River during the Battle of Bzura. The week-long battle ended with a decisive German victory, securing most of western Poland. Soldiers of the SS Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler Division rested in a ditch while advancing towards Pabianice during the invasion of Poland. The division played a key role in the rapid German offensive. German advance guards and scouts moved through a Polish town that had been under heavy fire during the Nazi invasion. The town had already suffered significant damage from the bombing. On September 16th, German infantry cautiously advanced on the outskirts of Warsaw, Poland, amid intense fighting during the Nazi invasion. The Polish capital was under heavy bombardment. In September 1939, several civilian prisoners of war, with arms raised, were forced to walk along a road, reflecting the brutality faced by non-combatants. On September 1st, a crowd gathered outside the US State Department building, reading headlines that read, "Bombs rain on Warsaw," as diplomats held a conference on the escalating war in Europe. This moment marked the start of World War II. On September 3rd, Britain's King George VI broadcasted to the nation, marking the first evening of World War II. His speech served to rally the British people in the face of the conflict. On September 4th, acting town crier W.T. Boston read aloud the war proclamation from the steps of the Royal Exchange in London, marking the official declaration of World War II. This moment signaled the start of a conflict that would eventually lead to the use of nuclear weapons. On September 17, 1939, the HMS Courageous was sunk by torpedoes from the German U-29 after being stalked for hours. The attack killed 518 of its 1,259 crew members. On March 6th, Ordynaka Street in Warsaw was left in ruins, with a dead horse among piles of debris. During the invasion, Warsaw suffered relentless bombing, including 1,150 sorties on September 25, 1939, when over 550 tons of bombs were dropped. In September 1939, near Blony, a Polish armored train carrying tanks was captured by the 14th SS Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler Division during the invasion of Poland. German soldiers, captured by the Polish army during the Nazi invasion, are shown while being held captive in Warsaw on October 2nd. A young Polish boy returns to his home, now a ruin, during a pause in the German air raids on Warsaw in September 1939. Warsaw surrendered on September 28th, and by October 5th, Polish forces capitulated, leaving Poland under German and Soviet control. On October 5th, Adolf Hitler salutes parading German Wehrmacht troops in Warsaw after the invasion. Behind him stand, from left to right, Colonel General Walter von Brauchitsch, Lieutenant General Friedrich von Kochenhausen, Colonel General Gerd von Rundstedt, and Colonel General Wilhelm Keitel. In July 1939, Japanese soldiers advanced inland over the beach after landing at Swato, Shantou, one of the last South China ports under Chinese control. Following a brief clash with Chinese defenders, the Japanese entered the city with little resistance. On July 21st, the tanks roll across the vast Mongolian-Manchurian steppe near the Mongolian border. Manchukuo troops, reinforced by the Japanese, faced sudden border clashes with Soviet forces in the region. In July, a Japanese machine gun unit cautiously moves forward, passing two Soviet armored cars abandoned during the fighting along the Mongolian frontier. On November 30th, after Finland rejected Soviet demands, the USSR invaded with 450,000 soldiers, starting the Winter War. In this image, a Finnish anti-aircraft soldier in white camouflage uses a rangefinder during a Russian aerial attack on December 28, 1939. A house burns fiercely after being struck by a Soviet bomb during a Russian air raid on Turku, a port city in southwest Finland, on December 27, 1939. On January 17, 1940, captured Soviet tanks and cars lay along a road in a snow-covered forest. Finnish troops had just overpowered an entire Soviet division. On January 19, 1940, Finnish troops scatter for cover as Soviet planes fly over during an air raid on a frozen wooded battlefront somewhere in Finland. On March 28, 1940, Finnish soldiers from a ski battalion marched with their reindeer while fighting against invading Russian troops. On February 20, 1940, a Swedish volunteer in northern Finland protects himself from the sub-zero Arctic cold with a mask while on duty against Russian invaders. On December 19, 1939, the German battleship Admiral Graf Spee burns off Montevideo, Uruguay, after the Battle of the River Plate. Damaged by 3 Royal Navy cruisers, the crew scuttled the ship outside the port to avoid a blockade. On March 18, 1939, restaurant operator Fred Horak of Somerville, Massachusetts, displays a sign in the window of his lunchroom. Horak, a native of Prague, Czechoslovakia, posted it during a significant time. Curtiss P-40, Warhawk fighter aircraft being manufactured, likely in Buffalo, New York. On December 18, 1939, as German forces focused on Poland, French troops posed in a cantonment in France, while British soldiers deployed along the border with Germany, amid rising anxiety on the Western Front. On August 27th, vast crowds of Parisians gathered at the Basilica of the Sacred Heart on Montmartre Hill to attend a religious service and pray for peace, as seen in front of the church in France. On January 4, 1940, members of the French Army operate an acoustic locator device designed to detect distant aircraft engines. This experimental technology became obsolete soon after the introduction of radar. On September 20, 1939, British troops cheerfully boarded a train for the first stage of their trip to the Western Front, somewhere in England. On October 19th, a group of newspapermen on the Western Front stood atop a fort in the Maginot Line, France, with a French army guide pointing out the no man's land separating French and German troops. On August 11th, London's Westminster Bridge and the Houses of Parliament were shrouded in darkness after the first blackout trial, conducted by the Home Office in preparation for possible German air raids. On March 3rd, at Holborn Town Hall in London, officials and mothers tested a respirator designed to protect babies from poison gas. Several babies under 2 were fitted with baby helmets. Adolf Hitler consulted a geographical survey map with his general staff, including Heinrich Himmler and Martin Bormann, at an undisclosed location. On October 30, 2008, a man views a photograph of Johann Georg Elser mounted on a monument in Freiburg, Germany. Elser, who attempted to assassinate Adolf Hitler with a self-made bomb in Munich on November 8, 1939, was caught and executed in Dachau before World War II ended. An armored tank crosses the Aisne River in France on June 21, 1940, just one day before France's surrender. This moment underscores the relentless advance toward victory. Paratroopers descend onto snow-covered rock ledges in Narvik, Norway, as part of the invasion of Scandinavia. The intense assault marks a decisive moment in the battle for the port city. The remnants of a naval battle in Narvik, Norway, in 1940, reveal where German and Norwegian forces clashed in the Ofot Fjord during the spring. These fierce engagements were pivotal in the struggle for control of the region. A group of Gebirgsjägers in action during the battle for Narvik highlights their specialized skills in the harsh, rugged terrain of the region. Soldiers march through a burning Norwegian village in April as the invasion intensifies. The flames reflect the devastation left in the wake of the advance. Members of a British Royal Air Force bombing squadron give a thumbs up on April 22, 1940, after returning from an attack on German warships near Bergen, Norway. Their successful mission marks a moment of triumph amid the intense conflict. An aircraft spotter watches the skies from a rooftop in London, with St. Paul's Cathedral standing tall in the background. The city remains on high alert during the air raids of World War II. Bombs miss their targets and detonate in the sea during an air raid on Dover, England in July. The close call highlights the intense tension of the battle for Britain's skies. Members of the Black Watch, a renowned Scottish regiment, endure tough training on England's south coast in 1940, preparing to become combat parachutists. Their rigorous drills shape them for the challenges of airborne warfare. The Royal Irish Fusiliers assist French farmers on March 27th, after their horses are requisitioned by the French army. A tank is hitched to a plough, aiding in the spring tilling of the soil. Belgian women bid tearful goodbyes to their husbands and sons on May 11th, as the threat of invasion looms over their homeland. The emotional farewell marks the beginning of a dark chapter in their lives. A formation of Ju-87 Stuka dive bombers flies over an unknown location on May 29, 1940. Their menacing presence signals the power of the Luftwaffe's air assault. An anti-aircraft gun roars into action at an undisclosed location on April 9th, providing support as German troops advance into Danish territory. Reconnaissance squads lead the advance into Luxembourg on May 10th. Their mission marks the beginning of the rapid invasion of the small, strategic country. Parachute troops descend on Fort Eben-Emael in Belgium on May 30th, as part of a larger, unexpected attack. The surprise assault catches defenders off guard, marking a pivotal moment in the battle. French soldiers load artillery in a wooded area on the Western Front on May 29th. The shell is aimed at occupied sectors of their homeland, symbolizing their defiant resistance. A formation of Dornier Du 17Z light bombers flies over France on June 21, 1940. Their menacing presence marks the ongoing aerial assault as German forces close in on victory. Parachute troops took positions on a machine gun post in the Netherlands on June 2nd. This photo, discovered on a captured camera, offers a rare glimpse into their operations. Belgians destroy a bridge across the Meuse River in Dinant, Belgium, on June 20th. Soon after, a wooden bridge constructed by sappers enables the continued advance. A woman, fleeing with the few belongings she can carry, takes cover behind a tree on a Belgian roadside on May 18th during an aerial attack. Her bicycle, laden with possessions, leans against the tree as she clings to it for protection. Hundreds of thousands of British and French troops, having fled from advancing German forces, gather on the beaches of Dunkirk, France on June 4th. They await ships to carry them to safety in England, marking a critical moment of evacuation. British and French troops wade through shallow waters along the beach at Dunkirk, France, on June 13th, heading towards small rescue craft bound for England. Around 700 private vessels, alongside military ships, help ferry the men across the channel. Men of the British Expeditionary Force safely return home after their battle in Flanders on June 6, 1940. Over 330,000 soldiers were rescued from Dunkirk in the daring mission known as Operation Dynamo. On June, oil tanks burn in Dunkirk, France, as fires rage through the area. In the foreground, and the Royal Air Force's Coastal Command Lockheed Hudson conducts a patrol, keeping watch over the chaotic scene. English and French prisoners of war sit near railroad tracks in Belgium in 1940. Their weary faces reflect the harsh reality of captivity during the early stages of the war. German troops march in Copenhagen, Denmark on April 20th to celebrate Hitler's birthday. The parade underscores the growing Nazi presence in occupied territories. French tanks roll through a bombarded town in France on May 25th as they head toward the front line. The scene reflects the devastation and urgency of the battle unfolding across the country. Women wave Union Jacks to greet passing Canadian soldiers as they march from the docks after disembarking in France on June 18th. The moment symbolizes a warm welcome as the troops prepare to face the enemy. Some of the 350 British children who arrived in New York City on July 8, 1940, aboard the British liner Samaria. They were the first large group of English children sent to safety, escaping the looming threat of a Nazi invasion. Troops marched down a deserted street in Luxembourg on May 21st, rifles, pistols, and grenades at the ready. Their cautious advance reflects the tension of occupying a newly conquered territory. On July 20th, bombs released by the Royal Air Force during a raid on the Abbeville aerodrome, held by German forces. The attack marks a bold strike against enemy air power in the heart of occupied France. Refugees leave their bombed-out town in Belgium on May 19th, carrying whatever personal belongings they could salvage. The destruction wrought by German bombings forces them to flee with heavy hearts and few possessions. Nazi motorcyclists ride through a devastated town in France in 1940. The scene is a stark reminder of the destruction left in the wake of their advance through the country. A crowd of women, children, and Wehrmacht soldiers raise the Nazi salute on June 19th at an undisclosed location in Germany. The moment captures the widespread influence of Nazi ideology during the early years of the war. British Prime Minister Winston Churchill inspects Britain's Grenadier Guards standing at attention in front of light Bren gun armoured units in July. The scene reflects his leadership and the resolve of the British forces during a critical period of the war. An Allied soldier activates the plunger of an explosive device to destroy a bridge, delaying the Nazi advance in the Leuven region of Belgium on June 1st, 1940. This act of sabotage takes place just before the area falls to German forces. A Belgian family of 4 rides a tandem bicycle with their belongings strapped to their backs as they flee the advancing Nazis into France on June 14th. Their journey reflects the desperate flight from the invasion and the uncertainty ahead. The French destroyer Mogador burns after being shelled during the British attack on Mers el-Kebir, French Algeria, on July 3rd. Britain aimed to prevent French ships from falling into German hands, resulting in heavy damage and 1,297 French casualties. Heavy mortars of Hitler's army are positioned under cliffs on the French side of the English Channel at Fécamp during occupation of France and the Low Countries. A soldier stands in the tower of the cathedral, overlooking the captured French city of Strasbourg on July 15, 1940. Hitler had visited it in June, declaring plans for the cathedral to become a national sanctuary of the German people. St. Paul's Cathedral stands resilient amidst the smoke and flames during a night air raid over London in December 1940 as a symbol of defiance. The cathedral's silhouette remains steadfast against the chaos, embodying hope in the face of destruction. A fleet of German Heinkel He-111 bombers cuts through the skies, flying low over the English Channel. Their dark silhouettes against the vast waters hint at the looming threat of war. On September 20th, in a British capital, 3 anti-aircraft guns light up the dark sky as they fire at German bombers. Shells, stacked behind the guns, are jolted into the air by the powerful blasts, adding to the chaos of the night. On July 20th, schoolchildren take part in an air raid drill, instructed to protect themselves in case an attack comes too quickly. They crouch in the center of the room, hands covering the backs of their necks, a precautionary measure against the looming threat. In August, the twin-engine Messerschmitt Bf 110, known as the Flying Shark, soars over the English Channel. Its sleek, menacing form cuts through the sky, a predator on the hunt. On September 3, 1940, over Kent, the sky is streaked with condensation trails from German and British fighters locked in an intense aerial battle. The conflict above the southeastern coast marks a fierce clash for control of the skies. Fires set by enemy bombs light up the docks along the River Thames, vividly revealing the merchant ships docked there. The bombing, the heaviest of the war to that point, took place on September 7th. A massive column of smoke rises from a fire ignited in Plymouth, following a heavy enemy bombardment in November. The smoke towers into the sky, a chilling reminder of the destructive power of the raid. On September 21st, the tail and part of the fuselage of a German Dornier plane, shot down by British fighters on September 15th, landed on a London rooftop. The remaining wreckage of the raiding plane crashed near Victoria Station. Workmen in a factory in England fit a set of paraboloids into a sound detector designed for anti-aircraft batteries. This crucial technology aids in defending England against aerial threats. Tilbury, the largest food supply shipping centre, has been heavily targeted by air attacks. On October 4th, bombs fall on the port, with the first wave hitting ships in the Thames and the second targeting the docks. 2 Nazi Ju-87 Stuka dive bombers return after an attack on the British south coast during the Battle of Britain on August 19th. Their return marks another intense strike in the ongoing aerial conflict. Before an assault on Berlin begins on October 24th, a bomb is carefully fitted to the wings of a British raider. The preparation marks a pivotal moment in the escalating conflict. A 90-minute exposure from a Fleet Street rooftop during an air attack on September 2nd shows searchlight beams spotting an enemy raider. Star trails cross the image, disturbed by anti-aircraft fire, while a flare streaks across the top left behind St. Bride's Church. On October 8th, people seek shelter and rest on the platform and tracks of Aldwych Underground Station in London, following sirens warning of impending Nazi bombing raids. The station becomes a temporary refuge amidst the chaos. The Palace of Westminster stands silhouetted against the glow of fires ignited by bombings, casting an eerie light over the historic structure. The blast from a bomb raid on December 5th tossed furniture vans on top of one another in a street, a striking display of the blast's force and destruction. On October 23rd, a smiling girl, dirtied but unharmed, is helped across a street after being rescued from the rubble of a bomb-damaged building during a daylight assault. On September 9th, 1940, firemen spray water on buildings near London Bridge in the city, following a series of weekend air raids that left the area damaged and smouldering. Hundreds of people in Hastings, a southeast English town, seek refuge in caves after bombings destroy their homes. On December 12th, special areas for games and recreation are set up, with some even bringing furniture and sleeping in their own beds. Undaunted by a night of air attacks that left his storefront blasted, a shopkeeper opens his doors the following morning for business as usual. All that remains of a German bomber downed on the English southeast coast is a wreck, riddled with bullet holes. On July 13, 1940, its machine guns were twisted out of action, a stark reminder of the intense battle. In a salvage yard on August 26th, British workers dismantle the remains of raiders shot down over England. The wreckage serves as a reminder of the fierce aerial conflict. A massive scrap heap of German planes brought down over Great Britain is photographed on August 27, 1940. The large number of Nazi planes downed during raids significantly contributed to the national scrap metal salvage campaign. In the autumn of 1940, a Nazi Heinkel He-111 bomber flies over London with the Thames River flowing beneath it. The aircraft looms ominously over the city, a symbol of the ongoing aerial assault. Mrs. Mary Couchman, a 24-year-old warden from a small Kentish village, shields 3 children, including her son, during an air attack on October 18th. The children were playing when the siren sounded and bombs began to fall. She gathered them in her arms, protecting them with her body. When praised for her bravery, she said, "Oh, it was nothing. Someone had to look after the children." 2 barrage balloons burst into flames after being shot down by German warplanes during an aerial attack over the Kent coast in England on August 30th, 1940. The fiery wreckage highlights the intensity of the battle. Air raid damage, including the twisted remains of a double-decker city bus, is seen in the City of London on September 10th, 1940. The destruction serves as a stark reminder of the ongoing attacks. A scene of devastation in the Dockland area, attacked by a German bomber on September 17th, shows the aftermath of the deadly attack. The destruction marks another brutal blow in the ongoing air campaign. Amid the ruins of London following a German aerial bombing in 1940, an abandoned boy clutches a stuffed toy animal. His lonely figure stands as a heartbreaking symbol of the destruction. During an attack on September 20th, a German aircraft releases its load of bombs. The deadly payload marks another strike in the ongoing aerial assault. On September 7th, 1940, one of many fires ignites in Surrey Commercial Dock after a heavy night raid. The flames spread as a result of the devastating attack. Fires rage in the city after a lone bomber dropped incendiary bombs near the heart of the city on September 1st. The flames spread, causing widespread destruction. On December 25th, children enjoy themselves at a Christmas party in an underground shelter. Despite the ongoing war, the spirit of the season brings moments of joy and warmth. The effects of a large concentrated attack by the German Luftwaffe on London's dock and industrial districts on September 7, 1940, are evident. Factories and storehouses were severely damaged, and the mills at Victoria Docks, below left, show the destruction caused by fire. The Record Office in London is illuminated by flames ignited by a German air raid in 1940. The fire marks another devastating strike during the ongoing bombing campaign. On October 22nd, Princess Elizabeth, 14-year-old heiress apparent to the British throne, makes her broadcast debut, delivering a 3-minute speech to British children evacuated overseas. She is joined by her sister, Princess Margaret Rose, as they bid goodnight to their listeners. On September 3rd, 1940, soldiers carry off the tail of a Messerschmitt 110, shot down by fighter planes in Essex. The wreckage serves as a reminder of the intense air battles taking place. On September 24th, the Windmill Theatre continued to provide performances despite the bombs and sirens. Behind the scenes, one of the girls washes while the others sleep, surrounded by their costumes, having lived and eaten on the premises during the wartime. On October 16th, a German raid smashed this hall in an undisclosed London district. The destruction marks another chapter in the relentless bombing campaign over the city. On September 7th, 1940, A huge crater was made in a road at Elephant and Castle after a night attack. The damage left behind a stark reminder of the destruction caused by the ongoing air attacks. Two girls on the south coast look out toward the beach through a barbed wire fence, part of Britain's coastal defences. The fence marks the heightened security during wartime, protecting the shores from potential attacks. On November 28th, artist Ethel Gabain, newly appointed by the Ministry of Information to create historical war pictures, works among the bombed ruins in the East End. Her work captures the devastation and resilience of the city during the war. In November, a forward machine gunner sits at his battle position in the nose of a German bomber en route to England. His role was crucial as the bomber made its way into enemy territory. Amid the ruins of a bookshop following an air raid on October 8, 1940, a boy sits reading a book titled The History of London. His quiet moment stands in stark contrast to the destruction around him. By their fourth year of war with Japan, Chinese forces focused on modernizing their military, enhancing their air force, manufacturing weapons, and training officers in advanced warfare. Seen here, Chinese cadets in full battle gear, wearing German-style steel helmets, parade in China on July 11, 1940. British infantrymen take position in a shallow trench near Bardia, a Libyan port held by Italian forces. After a 20-day siege, the Allies captured the port on January 5, 1941. A British bomber lifts off against the backdrop of rocky terrain in East Africa on May 15th, leaving a trail of smoke and sand in its wake. On June 21, 1940, British Mediterranean Fleet warships bombarded Fort Capuzzo in Bardia, Libya. An official photographer aboard a battleship captured the action, while anti-aircraft pom-pom guns stood ready for defense. An aerial view of Tobruk, Libya, reveals petrol dumps ablaze following Allied attacks in 1941. Bardia, a fortified Libyan seaport, fell to British forces, resulting in over 38,000 Italian prisoners, including 4 generals and a large haul of war supplies. On February 5, 1941, an endless stream of Italian prisoners marched out as Australian troops secured the area. In January 1941, a squadron of Bren gun carriers, operated by the Australian Light Cavalry, moved through the Egyptian desert. The troops were conducting maneuvers to prepare for the Allied campaign in North Africa. An armourer from the RAF's Middle East Command prepares a bomb for its mission against Italian forces in Africa. Although unfused, once completed, it will be ready for its deadly purpose. The photo was taken on October 24, 1940. On December 28th, a patrol of British Hurricane fighter planes broke formation to engage enemy aircraft while flying over a Middle Eastern sector. Captured from a British warplane during the assault on Tobruk, this photo shows the Italian cruiser San Giorgio burning amidships in Tobruk's harbour on February 18, 1941. The ship was scuttled, its decks littered with wreckage and shattered equipment. On February 19th, Haile Selassie, exiled Emperor of Ethiopia, returned with an Ethiopian army to support the British in Africa. He inspects an airport with an interpreter. After the Italians were defeated, Selassie reclaimed his throne in Addis Ababa on May 5th. Field Marshal General Erwin Rommel, commander of the German Afrika Korps, drinks from a cup with an unidentified German officer while seated in a car, inspecting troops sent to support the Italian army in Libya. On April 14th, a massive Panzer IV German tank, part of the German Expeditionary Force in North Africa, comes to a stop in the Libyan desert. On December 17, 1940, children from Japan, Germany and Italy gathered in Tokyo to celebrate the signing of the tripartite alliance. Japanese Education Minister Kunihiko Hashida, holding crossed flags, and Tokyo Mayor Tomejiro Okubo were among the sponsors. On November 17th, a British cruiser tank is unloaded at a port in Egypt, part of a large shipment of tanks sent by British forces. On December 9th, Cameron Highlanders, a Scottish infantry regiment, and Indian troops march past the Great Pyramid in the North African desert. On September 14, 1940, a Japanese bomber flies over Chongqing, China, as smoke rises from bombs dropped near a bend of the Yangtze River. On May 2, 1941, in Chongqing, China, Chinese soldiers operate a sound detector to guide the firing of 3-inch anti-aircraft guns. On June 30th, a Japanese tank crosses an emergency bridge somewhere in China. Amidst complete devastation, this Chinese water boy continued his work after 4 days and nights of relentless aerial bombardment by Japanese warplanes in Chongqing, China, on August 10, 1940. On October 29th, an aerial view captures Japan's home fleet arranged in a battle line off the coast of Yokohama, Japan. On September 26th, French colonial forces withdrew from Haiphong in French Indochina as Japanese occupation troops took control of the port and city. This move followed the Franco-Japanese Agreement, where Vichy France granted military access to Japanese forces. On January 9, 1941, Italian bombers flew toward the Albanian-Greek frontier for combat. Italian forces had begun their invasion of Greece from Albanian territory on October 28, 1940. On January 11th, Royal Air Force bombers launched a raid on the Italian-occupied port city of Valona, Albania. In May 1941, a squad of German soldiers marches through a Greek village during the occupation of Greece. On June 16th, a paratroop aircraft crashes on the Greek island of Crete, showing the price paid by German air invaders. While fighter planes patrolled, troop-carrying aircraft followed, escorted by bombers. In early 1941, a paratrooper and his parachute lie on the island of Crete after a fall. In January 1941, a view from the roof of St. Paul's Cathedral in London shows the building surrounded by fires during the Great Blitz. Devastated buildings stretch across the scene, with the Old Bailey's Tower, topped by its Statue of Justice, still standing to the upper left. On January 19th, German anti-aircraft guns fire smoke along the Channel coast of France. On August 3, 1940, the Lancastria was bombed by a German Junkers 88 while evacuating British nationals and troops from France. The ship sank within 20 minutes, with 2,477 rescued and around 4,000 perishing. This photo shows the liner tipping as men scramble for safety, with many in the water. On January 31st, during a nighttime air raid over Brest, France, this photograph captures the intense flak and anti-aircraft fire. The camera, with its shutter open for 3 to 4 seconds, reveals the tracer shells as fine lines of light and the heavier gunfire as broader lines. Factories and buildings are visible below. On January 14, 1941, a British soldier in battle dress and a bearded Canadian sailor share a light at an English port. On January 1st, Jimmy Stewart, former movie star, is sworn in as a second lieutenant in the U.S. Air Corps by Lieutenant E.L. Reed at Moffett Field, California. Stewart was one of Hollywood's top actors before joining the Army. On August 28, 1940, outdated but serviceable U.S. destroyers sit in the back bay at the Philadelphia Navy Yard. Plans were underway to modernize these ships and transfer them to Allied countries, a move that would become part of the Lend-Lease program in March 1941, leading to billions of dollars in war material being sent overseas. On January 21, 1941, a crew of observers on the Empire State Building in New York City participated in an air defense test conducted by the US Army. Their task was to spot invading enemy bombers and relay the information to centers that would dispatch interceptor planes. The 4-day test covered an 18,000 square mile area in the northeastern states. On March 19th, US postal employees in San Francisco burned 17 tons of reading materials labeled as propaganda. The majority of the newspapers, books, and pamphlets came from Nazi Germany, with some from Russia, Italy, and Japan. On December 28, 1940, Arab recruits line up for their first drill under a British soldier in the British Mandate of Palestine. Around 6,000 Palestinian Arabs enlisted in the British Army during World War II. On December 16th, artillery signallers at an outpost in Palestine prepare at dawn, dressed warmly to ward off the desert chill. On December 20th, a newly constructed wall partitions the central part of Warsaw, Poland. Built by the Nazis, the red brick and grey stone walls, 12 to 15 feet high, formed a ghetto for the city's approximately 500,000 Jews. On February 17, 1941, in the Warsaw Ghetto, Jews are seen wearing white armlets with the Star of David. Trams are marked with the words, "For Jews Only." In December 1940, a German army officer lectures children in a ghetto in Lublin, German-occupied Poland, advising them, "Don't forget to wash every day." On December 20th, in Szydłowiec, Poland, the faces of Jewish children are seen in the ghetto under Nazi occupation. On June 22, 1941, Soviet rocket launchers unleash their firepower as German forces invade the USSR, marking the start of Operation Barbarossa. An SDKFZ 250 half-track leads tank units, preparing for an assault along the Russian front during the invasion of the Soviet Union on July 21st. A half-track driver operates inside an armored vehicle during the campaign in Russia, August. German infantrymen monitor enemy movements from their trenches, preparing for an advance into Soviet territory on July 10th. Stuka dive bombers soar toward their target over coastal territory between the Dnieper and Crimea, nearing the Gate of the Crimea on November 6th. Troops navigate a stormboat across the Don River during the 1941 invasion of the Caucasus region in the Soviet Union. In October, German soldiers guide a horse-drawn vehicle over a corduroy road through wetlands near Salla on the Kola Peninsula, a Soviet-occupied area in northeast Finland. A sentry stands watch in the recently captured city of Kiev, with a burning bridge across the Dnieper River in the background. Machine gunners of the Far Eastern Red Army stand ready during the Axis invasion of the USSR. A bomber, with its starboard engine ablaze, crashes over an unknown location during World War II in November. Nazi troops lie hidden in the undergrowth during the fighting leading up to the capture of Kiev, Ukraine. On July 2nd, Russian soldiers, hands clasped behind their heads, are marched back to the rear of enemy lines, while a column of troops moves up to the front as hostilities between the two nations begin. On October 21st, in a Leningrad suburb, Russian men and women salvage their belongings from their burning homes, reportedly set on fire by the Soviets themselves as part of a scorched earth policy. On July 26th, reindeer graze on an airfield in Finland as a warplane takes off in the background. Heinrich Himmler, head of the Gestapo and Waffen-SS, inspects a prisoner of war camp in Russia, sometime between 1940 and 1941. This photo shows some of the 650,000 Russian prisoners the Germans claim to have captured at Bryansk and Vyazma during the fierce fighting on the Moscow front. They are seen here, waiting to be transported to a prisons of war camp on November 2nd, 1941. On August 7th, Adolf Hitler examines a Russian war map with General Field Marshal Walter von Brauchitsch, Commander-in-Chief and Chief of Staff Colonel, General Franz Halder. On June 26th, during the invasion of the Soviet Union, Axis soldiers, backed by armored personnel carriers, move into a burning Russian village at an undisclosed location. On September 15th, a large Russian gun, likely a 203mm howitzer M1931, is operated by its crew from a well-concealed position on the front lines. German forces, advancing rapidly, encountered strong guerrilla resistance behind their front lines. In this image, 4 guerrillas, armed with fixed bayonets and a small machine gun, are seen in action near a small village. On September 19th, Red Army soldiers inspect war trophies, captured during battles with the invading Axis forces, somewhere in Russia. On October 3rd, 1941, a view of the destruction in Riga, the capital of Latvia, shows the aftermath of the Russian withdrawal as the city fell under Nazi control. On October 19th, a Finnish troop train passes through a scene of an earlier explosion that wrecked one train, tearing up the rails and embankment. On November 22nd, burning houses, ruins and wrecks reflect the intensity of the battle that took place before Axis forces entered the stubbornly defended industrial center of Rostov on the lower Don River. General Heinz Guderian, commander of Germany's Panzergruppe II, chats with members of a tank crew on September 3rd, 1941, on the Russian front. Soldiers remove one of many Soviet national emblems on July 18th during their drive to conquer Russia. A man, his wife and child are seen after leaving Minsk on August 9th as the Axis army swarmed in. The original wartime caption reads, "Hatred for the Nazis burns in the man's eyes as he holds his little child, while his wife, completely exhausted, lies on the pavement." On October 1st, officials claimed this long-distance photo of Leningrad showed Soviet aircraft, but they were likely barrage balloons. This marked the furthest advance, as the city endured a 2-year siege without falling. On October 19th, a flood of Russian armored cars moved toward the front lines. Colonel General Ernst Busch inspects an anti-aircraft gun position on September 3rd, 1941, somewhere in Germany. Finnish soldiers storm a Soviet bunker on August 10th, with one of the defenders surrendering on the left. German troops make a hasty advance through a blazing Leningrad suburb on November 24th. Russian prisoners of war are marched away after being captured on July 7th during the invasion. A column of prisoners of war, taken during recent fighting in Ukraine, is seen en route to a prison camp on September 3rd. Mechanized units rest at Staritsa, Russia, on November 21st, 1941, just evacuated by the Soviets, before continuing the fight for Kiev. The gutted buildings in the background show the thoroughness of the scorched earth policy. Infantrymen forced their way into a sniper hideout, where Russians had been firing on advancing troops on September 1st. 2 Russian soldiers, now prisoners of war, inspect a giant statue of Lenin, somewhere in Russia, torn from its pedestal and smashed during the advance on August 9th. The rope around the statue's neck was left there symbolically. An officer on the right, described by sources as a captured Russian colonel, is interrogated by Nazi officers on October 24th. Flames shoot high from burning buildings in the background as troops enter Smolensk, in the Central Soviet Union, during the offensive toward Moscow in August 1941. This trainload of men, described as Soviet prisoners, was en route to Germany on October 3rd. Several million Soviet soldiers were sent to prison camps, most of whom never returned alive. Russian snipers leave their hideout in a wheat field on August 27th, while enemy soldiers watch. In the foreground is a disabled Soviet tank. German infantrymen in heavy winter gear march next to horse-drawn vehicles, passing through a district near Moscow in November 1941. The harsh winter conditions strained the already weak supply lines, forcing Germany to halt its advance. This exposed soldiers to the elements and Soviet counterattacks, leading to heavy casualties and a significant loss of momentum in the war. On December 7, 1941, during the surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, the USS Shaw erupts in a massive explosion after being struck by bombs. Pilots of the Imperial Japanese Navy receive final instructions aboard an aircraft carrier before the assault. This scene, captured in a newsreel, was later acquired and shared by the US War Department. In September 1941, the aircraft carrier Zuikaku was photographed before its mission to Hawaii. It was one of 6 carriers involved in the attack. Aircraft prepare for takeoff from the carrier Akagi during the operation in Hawaii. A Nakajima Kate B-5N bomber takes off from Zuikaku to join the assault. This photo, originally from a Japanese film, was later seized by American forces. From a plane over Pearl Harbor, this aerial view captures the first devastating strikes on American ships. This captured photograph shows smoke billowing from Hickam Field during the raid. The battleship Arizona burns and sinks, seen from afar during the devastating raid. A US Navy photographer captured this image of a bomber, its diving flaps deployed as it approached its target. In this captured photograph from the early moments of the assault, aircraft are seen flying above the harbor, visible in the top center and upper right. During the attack, American ships burn amidst the chaos. The sky above the harbor is filled with smoke and anti-aircraft fire, captured in this wide-angle view. On December 7th, officers' wives saw explosions and smoke. They heard their neighbor Mary Naden, an army hostess, shout, "Those planes have red circles, they're Japanese." Realizing war had begun, the 2 women were shocked and started walking to their quarters. This aerial photograph, captured by a pilot, shows the attack, with a bomber visible in the lower right foreground. On December 7th, 1941, sailors stand amidst wrecked airplanes at Ford Island Naval Air Station, witnessing the explosion of the USS Shaw in the background during the Japanese surprise attack. After the bombing, a US flag flies from the stern of the sunken USS West Virginia. An A-6M-20 fighter is seen aboard the carrier Akagi during the mission. The USS Shaw burns after 3 bombs hit the forward section of the ship. The fires became uncontrollable, leading to an order to abandon ship. Shortly after, her forward ammunition magazines exploded in a massive blast, completely destroying the bow. The USS California sinks into the mud after the assault. A small boat rescues a USS West Virginia crew member from the water. 2 men are visible on the superstructure, upper center, with the mast of the USS Tennessee seen beyond the burning West Virginia. The forward magazines of the USS Arizona explode after being hit by a bomb. This frame was clipped from a color motion picture taken aboard the USS Solace. Planes fly over Hawaii during the attack, captured in this scene from a newsreel. The film was later acquired by the US War Department and released to US newsreels. In the aftermath, sailors at Naval Air Station Kaneohe worked to salvage a burning PBY Catalina. After the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, the battleships West Virginia and Tennessee burn amidst the chaos. Oil burns on the waters near the Naval Air Station. The USS Maryland, moored inboard of the USS Oklahoma, which capsized, sustained slight damage during the attack. The battleship USS Arizona belches smoke as it topples over into the sea. White House reporters rush to the telephones after Presidential Press Secretary Stephen T. Early announces that submarines and planes had just bombed the U.S. Pacific Fleet. In Times Square, New York City, papers are sold announcing the attack on U.S. bases in the Pacific. On December 8, 1941, President Franklin D. Roosevelt, declaring a ruthless, unprovoked attack, asks Congress to declare war. Listening are Vice President Henry Wallace and House Speaker Sam Rayburn. President Roosevelt signs the declaration of war at the White House in Washington, D.C., following the bombing. Young Japanese Americans, including several Army selectees, gather around a reporter's car in the Japanese section of San Francisco. The mine-layer USS Oglala lies capsized after being struck by aircraft and submarines. Heavy damage is seen on the destroyers USS Downs and USS Cassin, stationed at the harbor. An interior shot shows the destruction of an aircraft hangar at Wheeler Field. The wreckage of the first plane shot down during the attack. A midget submarine, part of the attacking force, is seen beached at Bellows Field. After the Japanese air raid on December 7, 1941, a small crowd inspects the damage to Paul Gu's residence, both inside and outside, after a bomb strike. Shortly after Japan went to war against the US, unidentified attachés of the consulate began burning papers, ledgers, and other records in New Orleans, Louisiana. Police intervened later, after most of the papers had been destroyed. This unidentified man, startled while taking papers and files from a cabinet at the consulate in Chicago, turns to face a visitor. Clad only in underwear, he was caught as confidential papers had already been burned. Following Hawaiian tradition, sailors honor the men killed during the assault on December 7th. The casualties had been buried on December 8th, and this ceremony took place in the months that followed. On December 10th, 1941, an aerial view shows oil-streaked waters and the dry docks at U.S. Naval Base Pearl Harbor, following the Japanese attack. In October 1942, a woman in Long Beach, California, works on the B-17F Navy bomber's nose section at the Douglas Aircraft Company. Known as the Flying Fortress, this heavy bomber served in the South Pacific, Germany and beyond, carrying a crew of 7 to 9. Mrs. Virginia Davis, answering the call for woman power, arranged childcare and joined her husband at the Naval Air Base in Texas. Both worked in the assembly and repair department under civil service. Mrs. Davis's training prepared her to take her husband's place if he were called to serve. In October 1942, a P-51 Mustang fighter soars over Inglewood, California. Built by North American Aviation, it was the one of the U.S. fighter used by Britain's Royal Air Force. In May 1942, a Marine lieutenant glider pilot prepares for takeoff at Page Field, Paris Island, South Carolina. Women at the Douglas Aircraft Company in Long Beach, California, trained as engine mechanics using rigorous methods. An American grenade, the kind the Axis dreads, is about to be thrown by an infantryman training at Fort Belvoir, Virginia. In 1941, large pipe elbows for the Army were made at Tube Turns, Inc. in Louisville, Kentucky, by heating pipes with gas flames and shaping them around a die. In August 1942, a sailor at the Naval Air Base in Corpus Christi, Texas, wears new protective clothing and a gas mask designed for chemical warfare. In December 1941, Goodyear Aircraft Corporation in Akron, Ohio, repurposes a massive support-free building for aircraft subassembly parts production. To support workers, new housing or improved transportation will be needed as cars and tires wear out during the emergency. A Marine Corps glider soars over Parris Island, South Carolina, in May 1942. A Marine parachutes over Parris Island, South Carolina. In June 1942, M4 General Sherman and M3 General Grant tanks march in training maneuvers at Fort. The M4 features a lower design, a larger turret gun, and 2 hatches in front of the turret. A tank commander at Fort Knox, Kentucky. M3 tanks at the same time. A tank crew stands in front of an M4 tank at Fort. In August 1942, Lorena Craig takes on a man-sized job at the Naval Air Base in Corpus Christi, Texas, after transitioning from a department store job to a cowler under civil service. A view of the B-25 final assembly line at North American Aviation's plant in Inglewood, California, published in 1942. In October 1942, part of the cowling for a B-25 bomber motor is assembled in the engine department at North American Aviation's plant. In Inglewood, California, cowling and control rods are added to motors for North American B-25 bombers as they move down the assembly line at North American Aviation. An experimental scale model of the B-25 bomber was readied for wind tunnel testing. The model maker is seen holding a precise miniature version of the type of bomb the plane was designed to carry. In Los Angeles, a P-51 Mustang fighter is being constructed at North American Aviation, probably in 1942. An employee in the drill press section at North American's large machine shop drills mounting holes in a large Dural casting. B-25 bombers at North American Aviation, Inc. They hauled along an outdoor assembly line in Kansas City, using an International tractor. In Long Beach, Annette Del Sur promotes a salvage campaign in the yard of the Douglas Aircraft Company. In February 1942, at Chase Brass and Copper Company in Euclid, Ohio, a billet is cast from an electric furnace. Modern furnaces have greatly accelerated the production of brass and copper alloys for national defense. The molten metal is poured from the tilted furnace into a mold to form a billet, which is then worked into rods, tubes, wires, or special shapes for various uses. In May 1942, at Parris Island, U.S. Marine Corps personnel prepare to bed down a large barrage balloon. In June 1942, a welder at Combustion Engineering in Tennessee works on making boilers for a ship. A young Armored Forces soldier at Fort Knox expertly handles his Garand rifle. He praises its accuracy and rugged, reliable mechanism. In October 1942, workers assemble Liberator bombers at Consolidated Aircraft Corporation in Fort Worth, Texas. In October, lathe operator machining parts for transport planes at the Consolidated Aircraft Corporation plant. In July 1942, a flying fortress is silhouetted against the sunset at Langley Field, Virginia. A water-stretching machine at a parachute factory in Manchester, Connecticut, stretches shroud lines to improve their adaptability for the final product. An American non-com expertly handles the side machine gun of a YB-17 bomber, fully committed to his role in the war, much to Hitler's dismay. In August 1942, National Youth Administration's trainee Elmer J. Pace learns Navy plane construction while working inside the nose of a PBY at Corpus Christi Naval Air Base in Texas. J.D. Estes, a 7-year Navy veteran, is regarded as an old sea salt by his peers at the Naval Air Base in Corpus Christi. Pearl Harbor widows in Corpus Christi joined war efforts with determination. Mrs. Virginia Young, whose husband was an early World War II casualty, supervises the assembly and repairs department at the Naval Air Base, helping workers like Ethel Mann, who operates an electric drill, find housing. A mechanic works in the motor maintenance section at Knox, Kentucky. In October 1942, a riveter works at the Douglas Aircraft Corporation Company. Men and women work as efficient teams on riveting and other tasks. The plant produces important aircraft, including the B-17F Flying Fortress Heavy Bomber, the A-20 Havoc Assault Bomber, and the C-47 Heavy Transport Plane for troops and cargo. Women workers install fixtures and assemblies onto the tail fuselage section of a B-17F bomber. American mothers and sisters, like these women, play a vital role in producing reliable planes for the men at the front. Carefully trained women inspectors check and inspect cargo transport inner wings before they are assembled on the fuselage. In June 1942, a half-track infantryman carries a Garand rifle at Fort. In May 1942, a combat crew receives final instructions before taking off in a powerful YB-17 bomber from a bombardment squadron base, Langley Field, Virginia. On April 18, 1942, a U.S. Army Air Force B-25B Mitchell bomber launches from the USS Hornet during the Doolittle raid on Japan. Although the mission caused limited damage, it became a symbol of hope, lifting American morale after Pearl Harbor. A crew member aboard the USS Hornet secures his bomber, while other teams prepare their planes for the daring Doolittle raid on Japan. Crew number 1 of the Doolittle raid, from the 34th Bombardment Squadron, poses proudly in front of their bomber. Lieutenant Column James H. Doolittle, second from left, leads the team, joined by Lieutenant Richard E. Cole, Lieutenant Henry A. Potter, Staff Sergeant Fred A. Bramer, and Staff Sergeant Paul J. Leonard. American B-25B bombers sit ready on the USS Hornet's flight deck, nearing the launch point for the daring Tokyo raid. An escort ship can be seen in the distant left background. A U.S. Army Air Force B-25B bomber takes off from the USS Hornet for Maji. General James Doolittle's historic raid on Tokyo. Each plane was armed with 3 500-pound bombs and 1 incendiary bomb. Smoke rises over Tokyo as Doolittle's raiders hit their targets. With no way to return to the USS Hornet and fuel running low, the bombers pressed westward, hoping to land safely in friendly Chinese territory. Ryozo Asano, spokesman for the Zaibatsu family enterprises, surveys the wreckage of his steel plant in Tokyo after the first US air raid. The strike hit 13 targets, including a steel mill, an oil tank farm, and an aircraft carrier under construction, resulting in around 50 casualties. 4 unidentified crewmen from aircraft number 14 of the Doolittle raid are escorted through a Chinese village after bailing out. While most airmen reached China safely, the help they received led to a brutal Japanese retaliation known as the Zhejiang Jiangxi campaign, where entire villages were destroyed, and an estimated 250,000 Chinese civilians lost their lives. Lieutenant Column James Doolittle, addressed a crowd of workers at the North American aviation plant, praising their role in the Tokyo raid. Referring to President Roosevelt's mythical Shangri-La, he declared, "It's right here, in this North American plant." Before its destruction in 1942, Lidice, Czechoslovakia, was a peaceful village. After the assassination of Reinhard Heydrich on May 27th, Hitler ordered Lidice to be leveled. All 192 men were executed, women sent to camps, and children taken by Germans. In May 1942, a gun-coupled camera aboard a British RAF Spitfire captured the moment a German Focke-Wulf FW-190 fighter was shot down over an unknown location. On May 23, 1942, following the thaw, the Russian front was plagued by widespread flooding. German soldiers waded through knee-deep icy water in harsh conditions. Sergeant P. Dorjiev, a Russian sniper credited with killing 181 Germans on the Leningrad front, surveys through binoculars while holding his rifle. Taken from the body of a dead German officer in 1942, this photo shows a German firing squad executing Soviet civilians in Babi Yar, a ravine in Kiev. Between 1941 and 1942, an estimated 100,000 to 150,000 Jews, Soviet prisoners, and others were killed by the Germans there. On February 10th, Russian troops advanced toward Moscow, escorting German prisoners captured during the conflict. In the barren landscape of Crimea, Ukraine, German infantrymen are forced to hug the ground for protection from enemy fire. With little cover in the harsh terrain, the soldiers rely on the limited shelter the land provides. On April 21st, a field loudspeaker is set up in Russia to broadcast propaganda to German soldiers, aiming to boost morale and influence the troops during the ongoing conflict. On March 28, 1942, the British destroyer HMS Campbelltown sits wrecked, wedged into the dock gates of the Normandy dry dock at Saint-Nazaire, France. Earlier that day, a Royal Navy and British commando raid aimed to prevent the Germans from using the valuable dock. The Campbelltown, packed with delayed action explosives, detonated later, killing over 300 Germans and rendering the dock inoperable. A wounded British prisoner of war sits on the ground. Following the raid in March, as the aftermath of the daring operation unfolds around him, US troops from the 160th Infantry Regiment disembark from a landing craft during amphibious training on Guadalcanal, Solomon Islands, preparing for future operations in the Pacific. On February 10th, Malayan soldiers charge forward in a battle zone, determined to defend their peninsula. This came before the Japanese completed their occupation, forcing the British to retreat to Singapore Island. On February 26th, after a Japanese raid in the Singapore area, a Chinese man and his young daughter sit calmly amid the destruction, eating bowls of rice as they try to maintain some semblance of normalcy. On March 9th, 1942, in Singapore, women and children are evacuated before the Japanese invasion. Carrying bags and paper sacks, they register to board a waiting ship, leaving the once secure British bastion behind. On January 17th, workmen clear debris in Singapore following a Japanese bombing raid on the British naval base as the city begins to recover from the attack. On February 15th, during the conference at which Singapore surrendered, Liu General Tomoyuki Yamashita, the Japanese commander, is seated at the left, facing the camera. Lieutenant General A.E. Percival, the British commander, is seen in profile at the right foreground. On February 12, 1942, a large freighter sinks slowly after being struck by Japanese bombs near one of Singapore's docks. Smoke rises from other targets in the area in this photo by C. Yates McDaniel, an Associated Press correspondent. McDaniel, one of the last to leave the besieged port, would later face more danger when his ship was bombed the following day. An American soldier stands tense in his foxhole on the Bataan Peninsula, preparing to throw a flaming bottle bomb at an advancing Japanese tank as he braces for battle. On May 6th, a large coastal gun is fired from fortified American positions on Corregidor Island, guarding the entrance to Manila Bay in the Philippines as the battle intensifies. Japanese forces deploy flamethrowers while attacking a fortified emplacement on Corregidor Island, Philippines, intensifying their assault on the American positions. Billows of smoke rise from burning buildings, pouring over the wall that encloses Manila's Intramuros district, as intense fighting ravages the area. In April 1942, American soldiers line up to surrender their arms to the Japanese at the naval base of Mariveles on Bataan Peninsula, marking a grim moment during the Philippines campaign. Japanese soldiers stand guard over American prisoners of war just before the start of the brutal Bataan Death March. This photograph was later seized from the Japanese during their 3-year occupation. After the surrender of Bataan on April 9th, American and Filipino prisoners of war are shown at the start of the horrific Bataan Death March. Beginning on April 10th, approximately 75,000 prisoners were force-marched 65 miles to Camp O'Donnell. Weakened by months of siege, the prisoners endured brutal harassment from Japanese troops, with those who were slow or sick killed along the way. American prisoners of war carry their wounded and sick during the grueling Bataan Death March. This photo was taken from the Japanese during their 3-year occupation of the Philippines. Prisoners are photographed with their hands tied behind their backs. Estimates vary, but between 5,000 to 10,000 Filipino and 600 to 650 American prisoners perished before reaching Camp O'Donnell. Thousands more would die in the camp due to the horrific conditions in the weeks that followed. In early May 1942, just before the Battle of the Coral Sea, a wave crashes over the main deck of the fleet oiler USS Neosho, engulfing the hose crew as she refuels the USS Yorktown. The Neosho was tragically lost in that battle. During the Battle of the Coral Sea, a Japanese aircraft carrier is bombed by a US Navy plane. This battle marked the first in history where neither side's ships directly sighted or fired upon the other. After being hit by Japanese torpedoes and bombs during the Battle of the Coral Sea, crewmen abandoned ship aboard the aircraft carrier USS Lexington. In the background, the USS Phelps stands by, taking on survivors. Eventually, the USS Phelps torpedoed the stricken carrier, scuttling it and sending it to the bottom of the sea. In May 1942, the USS Lexington explodes after being bombed by Japanese planes during the Battle of the Coral Sea. Over 200 of the carrier's 2,951-man crew perished with the ship. While the Japanese won a tactical victory, several of their damaged ships were unable to participate in the pivotal Battle of Midway just a month later. In 1943, Tom Kobayashi stands in the south fields of the Manzanar Relocation Center, set against the Sierra Nevada mountains in California's Owens Valley. Famed Japanese photographer Ansel Adams visited Manzanar that year to document the lives of those interned there. In April 1942, a store in Oakland is closed following evacuation orders. After the attack on Pearl Harbor, the owner had displayed an "I am an American" sign in the storefront window. On February 3rd, 2 plainclothes men watch as residents are removed from their homes on Terminal Island, a vital naval and shipbuilding center in Los Angeles. Around 400 men were rounded up by federal city and county officers. On April 1st, Exclusion orders were posted beside an air raid shelter poster on a brick wall at First and Front Streets in San Francisco. The orders directed the removal of people from the area, with evacuation set to be completed by noon on April 7th. On April 25th, Japanese heads of families and individuals living alone stand in line outside the Civil Control Station at the Japanese American Citizens League Auditorium in San Francisco. They are there for processing in response to Civilian Exclusion Order number 20. On March 27th, two views in Seattle, Washington, show the impact of the evacuation on a second-grade class. The top image shows a crowded classroom, while the bottom image depicts the same class after many students were removed, leaving an empty space. A farmhouse in the rural area of Mountain View, California, shows the farm where farmers raised market garden crops. Evacuees from this area, along with others in military zones, were later relocated to War Relocation Authority centers during World War II. Rachel Karumi was among the many evacuated children who attended Raphael Weil Public School in San Francisco, following the internment orders during World War II. A farewell letter displayed in the window of T.Z. Shiota, an importer in San Francisco's Chinatown, in April 1942, before the evacuation of residents reads, "At this hour of evacuation, when the innocent suffer with the bad, we bid you, dear friends of ours, with the words of beloved Shakespeare, parting is such sweet sorrow." Two friends share one last game together while awaiting evacuation in San Francisco in early 1942. This view shows a Japanese business district on Post Street in a San Francisco neighborhood, home to many residents before evacuation. You can compare this historic scene to the same intersection today using Google Maps Street View for a glimpse into how the area has changed over the years. In this photo from May 11th, a 23-year-old soldier and his 53-year-old mother are seen in a strawberry field near Florin, California. The soldier, home on furlough from Camp Leonard Wood, helped his family prepare for their forced evacuation. His mother had worked in a factory before her children leased land to let her retire. People from San Pedro arrive at the Santa Anita Assembly Center in Arcadia. They were temporarily housed at this center, located at the Santa Anita racetrack, before being relocated to other centers inland. A scene showing migrants being transferred from assembly centers to war relocation centers in 1942. This was part of the mass relocation effort during World War II. Arrivals are vaccinated by fellow evacuees upon reaching the assembly center in Arcadia, as part of the relocation process during World War II. A farmer and his daughter look at their strawberry farm on Bainbridge Island, Washington, on March 23rd, before they are forced to leave due to the internment orders. On March 30th, a crowd in Seattle watches from an overhead walkway as 225 residents from Bainbridge Island, Washington, are evacuated. The men, women, and children are taken by ferry, bus, and train to internment camps in California under U.S. Army orders. A bus carrying migrants becomes stuck in the sand near its destination, the Colorado River War Relocation Authority Center, near Poston, Arizona. Japanese people were not allowed to bring their cars to War Relocation Authority centers. Those who brought cars to the Manzanar Relocation Center in California had them impounded for the duration of their stay. Photo taken on April 2nd, 1942. The Santa Anita Park racetrack was converted into an internment camp, where evacuees were housed in barracks erected in Arcadia. Photo taken on April 3rd. In Salinas, Japanese identify their luggage at an assembly center before being transferred to a War Relocation Authority center. People removed from their Los Angeles homes line up at the Manzanar Relocation Center on March 23rd for their first meal upon arrival, which included rice, beans, prunes, and bread. Inside the Manzanar Relocation Center, 1943, Photographs and mementos are displayed on top of a radio in the Yonemitsu family's home. Women pose outside a barbershop at the Tule Lake Relocation Center in Newell, around 1942 or 1943. A wide view of the Japanese Tule Lake Relocation Center in Newell. Farm workers toil in the fields at the Tule Lake. 4 young Japanese boys from Sacramento read comic books at the Tule Lake Relocation Center in Newell on July 1, 1942. Crafting camouflage nets for the War Department. A dust storm strikes the Japanese Manzanar Relocation Center in California on July 3rd. 48 residents from the Granada Relocation Center near Lamar, Colorado, report for pre-induction physical exams at the Denver Induction Station on February 22nd. A crew of farmers works on a semi-automatic feeding, rotary potato planter at the Tule Lake Relocation Center in Newell on July 1st, 1945. San Francisco newspaper photographers capture images of potato planting at the Tule Lake Relocation Center on May 26, 1943. A random winter street scene. Artist C.T. Hibino at work. Evacuees at the Manzanar War Relocation Center perform calisthenics. People removed from their Los Angeles homes attend a dance at the government's camp at Manzanar on March 23, 1942. A referee in traditional dress oversees a sumo wrestling match in front of those interned at Santa Anita. Nursery school children play with a scale model of their barracks on September 11th. A funeral is held for James Wakasa at the Topaz Relocation Center in Utah on April 19, 1943. A military policeman shot and killed James Wakasa near the camp's barbed wire fence on April 11, 1943. Fellow evacuees protested the shooting and demanded the right to hold a public funeral at the location. The soldier who shot Wakasa was court-martialed and later found not guilty. After orders to relocate and detain persons were rescinded, migrants began returning home, and the camps began to close. Here, Shuichi Yamamoto, the last Japanese to leave the Granada Relocation Center in Amache, Colorado, bids farewell to project director James G. Lindley as the camp officially closes on October 15, 1945. Yamamoto, 65 years old, was returning to his former home in Marysville. A special 7-car train brings 450 residents of California back to their homes after more than 3 years at the Rowa Center of the War Relocation Authority in 1945 McGehee, Arkansas, arriving in Sacramento on Monday morning, July 30th. A crowd stands behind a barbed wire fence, waving goodbye to departing friends on a train leaving Santa Anita. A family returning home from a relocation camp in Hunt, Idaho, finds their home and garage vandalized with anti-Japanese graffiti and broken windows in Seattle, Washington, on May 10th. Evacuees from the Arizona Poston War Relocation Center stand in line at the departure station, where they receive ration books and bus tickets to return home in September 1945. The USS Enterprise aircraft carrier is seen at Ford Island in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, in late May 1942, being prepared for the Battle of Midway. An SBD-3 dive bomber from Bombing Squadron 6 is shown on the deck of USS Yorktown. The aircraft was piloted by Ensign G.H. Goldsmith and ARM-3 C.J.W. Patterson Jr. during the June 4, 1942, strike against the Japanese carrier Akagi. You can notice the battle damage on the tail. TBD-1 torpedo bombers of Torpedo Squadron 6 unfold their wings on the USS Enterprise's deck before launching an attack against 4 enemy carriers on the first day of the Battle of Midway. The squadron launched its attack on June 4th and lost 10 of 14 aircraft during the mission. A view of the stern quarter of the USS Enterprise in the Pacific. A Grumman F-4F-4 Wildcat fighter takes off from USS Yorktown on a combat air patrol on June 4th. This aircraft, number 13 of Fighting Squadron 3, was piloted by the squadron executive officer, Lieutenant William N. Leonard. 50 caliber machine gun on the right and mattresses for splinter protection on the lifeline are visible. The carrier Hiryu maneuvers to avoid bombs dropped by Army Air Force's B-17 Flying Fortresses during the Battle of Midway on June 4th. U.S. Navy Lieutenant Commander Maxwell F. Leslie, commanding officer of Bombing Squadron VB-3, ditches into the ocean near the heavy cruiser USS Astoria after successfully attacking the Japanese carrier Soryu. Black smoke rises from a burning U.S. oil tank that was set on fire during a Nazi air raid on Naval Air Station Midway. Despite the significant damage, the airstrip remained operational. A VB-8 SBD lands far off center, flying over the head of the landing signal officer aboard USS Hornet. Japanese Type 97 shipboard attack aircraft from the carrier Hiryu are seen amid heavy anti-aircraft fire during their torpedo attack on USS Yorktown. At least 3 planes are visible, with the closest having already dropped its torpedo and the others withdrawing. Smoke rises from the USS Yorktown after an enemy bomber hit the aircraft carrier. This scene aboard USS Yorktown shows the aftermath of being hit by 3 Japanese bombs. The dense smoke is caused by fires in the uptakes, where a bomb punctured and knocked out the boilers. The panorama was taken from the starboard side of the flight deck. A man with a hammer is likely sealing a bomb entry hole in the forward elevator. Black smoke pours from the aircraft carrier, which suffered hits from enemy aircraft during the raid. Navy fighters engaged the Japanese fleet during the attack off Midway, with a burning Nazi ship visible at the center. A Nazi Type 97 attack aircraft is shot down while attempting to carry out a torpedo attack during the mid-afternoon of June 4th. A U.S. Navy photographer captures a close aerial view of a heavy cruiser of the Mogami class, which was demolished by Navy bombs. The armored plate, steel decks, and superstructure are in a collapsed heap. The aircraft carrier Soryu is seen attempting to avoid bombs dropped by Army Air Force's B-17 Flying Fortresses. Crewmen navigate the sloping flight deck, heading for damaged sections to patch up the crippled ship after it was struck. The heavily damaged burning aircraft carrier Hiryu is captured in a photo from the carrier Hosho shortly after sunrise. Hiryu sank a few hours later, with the collapsed flight deck above the forward hangar visible. USS Yorktown is seen listing heavily to port after being struck by bombers and torpedo planes. A destroyer stands by at the right to assist as a salvage crew on the flight deck tries to stabilize the stricken aircraft carrier. After being damaged by Japanese bombers, crewmen climbed down ropes and ladders into small boats, which transferred them to rescue ships, including the destroyer seen at right. Later, a salvage crew returned to the abandoned ship, and as it moved toward port, an enemy submarine torpedoed and sank the Yorktown. The USS destroyer Hammond, seen in the background, sank after being hit by a torpedo. The Hammond had been providing auxiliary power to the damaged ship during salvage operations. The same attack struck Yorktown, which sank the next morning. Crewmen from another US warship are seen at the rail, standing by to rescue survivors. A US seaman is transferred between warships at sea. Prisoners of war captured by USS Ballard on Midway after being rescued from a lifeboat are under guard in June 1942. After being held for a few days, they were sent to Pearl Harbor on USS Sirius on June 23rd. Attu Island, Alaska, was home to about 46 people before the Nazi invasion. On June 6, 1942, 1,100 soldiers landed and occupied the island. One resident died during the invasion, and the remaining 45 were sent to a Japanese prison camp in Otaru, Hokkaido, where 16 died. On June 3, 1942, an aircraft carrier strike force launched air attacks over 2 days against Dutch Harbor Naval Base and Fort Mears in Dutch Harbor, Alaska. In this image, bombs explode in the water near Dutch Harbor during the attack on June 4, 1942. US forces watch as a massive fireball rises above Dutch Harbor, Alaska, after an enemy airstrike. During the Japanese air attacks of June 3rd to 4th, US forces defend Dutch Harbor, Alaska. Carrier-based aircraft bomb the SS Northwestern and oil tanks in Dutch Harbor, Alaska. US soldiers fight a fire after Japanese dive bombers raided their base in Dutch Harbor, Alaska in June 1942. Oil tanks, the SS Northwestern, a beached transport ship, and warehouses are set ablaze after air raids. The ruins of a bombed ship are visible on June 5th. Japanese forces on Kiska Island have laid out decoy aircraft on June 18th. A US Army Air Forces plane drops bombs on Nazi-occupied territory in the Aleutians in 1943. Bombs explode on occupied island on August 10th. A Japanese ship is aground in Kiska Harbor on September 18th. Dozens of bombs fall from a US bomber on occupied island, Alaska, on August 10th. Craters from previous bombing runs and zigzag trenches dug by the Japanese are visible. Adak Harbor in the Aleutians is home to a large US fleet anchored and ready to move against Kiska in August 1943. During the invasion, USS Pruitt leads landing craft from USS Hayward toward their landing beaches in Massacre Bay, Attu, on May 11th. Pruitt used radar and a searchlight to guide the boats 9 miles through the fog. The faint beam from the searchlight is visible in the photo. Landing boats carrying soldiers and equipment land on the beach at Massacre Bay, Attu Island, on May 11th. The American and Canadian troops successfully took control of Attu within 2 weeks after intense fighting with the enemy forces. Of the Allied troops, 549 were killed and 1,148 wounded, while only 29 of the Japanese troops survived. US burial teams counted 2,351 dead, with many others unaccounted for. A Canadian member of the American-Canadian Landing Force aims a Japanese machine gun found in a trench on Kiska Island on August 16th. After the brutal fighting to retake Attu Island, US and Canadian forces were prepared for a tough fight. Unknown to the Allies, the enemies had evacuated all their troops 2 weeks earlier. The invasion was unopposed, though 32 soldiers died in friendly fire incidents, 4 more by booby traps, and 191 were listed as missing in action. Wrecked Nazi planes, oil drums and other debris are scattered on Aleutian Islands on August 19, 1943, following Allied bombings. A photograph taken after the island was recaptured by Allied forces shows the badly damaged midget submarine base built by Japanese forces on Kiska Island. After Allied troops landed, a grave marker was discovered in a small graveyard amid the bombed-out ruins in August 1943. The marker, made and placed by the Japanese army, honored an American pilot who had crashed on the island. It reads, "Sleeping here, a brave air hero who lost youth and happiness for his motherland. July 25th, Nippon Army." Australian troops, protected by a heavy smokescreen, approach a German-held stronghold somewhere in the Western Desert, Northern Africa, on November 27, 1942. German General Erwin Rommel oversees the 15th Panzer Division between Tobruk and Sidi Omar in Libya, photographed in 1941. On January 3rd, Australian troops follow behind tanks in a practice advance across the North African sands. The infantry spreads thin to avoid air raids. A German Junkers Ju-87 Stuka dive bomber attacks a British supply depot near Tobruk, Libya, in October. On December 27, 1940, an RAF airman places a cross, made from aircraft wreckage, over a grave of 5 Italian airmen killed in the desert battle at Mersa Matruh on October 31, 1940. A Bren gun carrier, used by Australian light horse troops in Northern Africa, is seen on January 7, 1941. On January 28, 2 British tank officers in North Africa grin at war cartoons in an Italian newspaper. One holds a puppy found after the capture of Sidi Barrani, an early Italian base to fall. An Italian flying boat burns off the coast of Tripoli on August 18th, after an encounter with a Royal Air Force fighter patrol. The body of an Italian airman floats near the port wing. An Italian prisoner of war captured in Libya, still wearing his Afrika Korps cap, arrives in London on January 2, 1942. Batteries of an advanced Italian position near Tobruk, Libya, are shown on January 6th. On February 26th, British Blenheim bombers, escorted by fighters, set out on a raid over Cyrenaica. In February, a British patrol watches for enemy movements in a valley on the Egyptian side of the Egypt-Libya border. Bus, the mascot of an RAF squadron stationed in Libya, takes liberties with a pilot of an American-made Tomahawk plane in the Western Desert on February 15th. This hydroplane, part of the RAF Rescue Service, operates in the Nile Delta, assisting pilots forced to land in the water. Photo taken on March 11, 1942. A British pilot, experienced in desert weather, lands a Kitty Hawk fighter in a Libyan sandstorm on April 2nd. A mechanic assists as the pilot taxis through the storm. A wounded British soldier in Libya lies on a cot in a desert hospital tent, shielded from the tropical sun, on June 18th. General Bernard Montgomery, commander of the 8th Army, watches the battle in Egypt's Western Desert from the turret of an M3 Grant tank. Truck-mounted anti-tank guns of the 8th Army speed across the desert, launching attacks from unexpected positions on July 26, 1942. An aerial view of an air raid on an Axis plane base at Martuba, Libya, on July 6th, shows bomb bursts near Axis planes attempting to escape. On August 19th, Britain's Prime Minister Winston Churchill visits the Alamein area, meeting commanders and inspecting Australian and South African troops. A low-flying Royal Air Force plane escorts New Zealand trucks moving through Egypt on August 3rd. A British unit in an M3 Stuart Honey tank patrols Egypt's Western Desert near Mount Himimat on September 1st. A wounded German officer is guarded by a sentry in the Egyptian desert during a British offensive on November 13th. On September 1st, 1942, some of the 97 German prisoners captured by British forces in Egypt during a raid on Tel El Asa. An Allied convoy, escorted by sea and air, heads toward French North Africa as part of Operation Torch in November. US landing barges head ashore at Fadala, French Morocco, during the early stages of the November landings. Allied troops land near Casablanca, French Morocco, following the footprints left by the first waves. Under the watch of US troops, members of the Italo-German Armistice Commission are rounded up in Morocco on November 18th, after being surprised by American landings. French troops shake hands with American soldiers at a rail station in Oran, Algeria, on December 2nd. A US soldier guards the SS Partos, capsized after an Allied landing at a North African port at the same year. A German soldier, attempting to escape an Allied attack, takes cover in a bomb shelter in the Libyan desert on December 1st. A US Navy dive bomber attempts a road takeoff near Safi, French Morocco, on December 11th, but crashes into the soft shoulder. B-17 bombers of 12th Air Force drop bombs on the El Awina airdrome in Tunis on February 14, 1943. A US soldier cautiously advances with a submachine gun in Tunisia on January 12th, watching for any movement from German tank crews trapped in a burning tank. German prisoners were taken during an Allied raid on German-Italian positions in Sened, Tunisia on February 27th. 2,000 Italian prisoners marched through 8th Army lines on their way to a prisons of war camp in March. Anti-aircraft fire creates a protective screen over Algiers at night during an Axis raid on April 13th. Italian gunners man their field piece in a Tunisian cactus field on March 31st, 1943. General Dwight D. Eisenhower jokes with American soldiers during an inspection of the Tunisian front on March 18th. Citizens of Tunis greet victorious Allied troops as a British tankman receives a warm welcome on May 19th. After the surrender of Axis forces in Tunisia, Allied forces captured over 275,000 prisoners, including German and Italian soldiers in June. Actress-comedian Martha Raye entertains US Army 12th Air Force servicemen on a makeshift stage at the edge of the Sahara Desert. Following the defeat of Axis forces in North Africa, US Air Transport Command planes carry supplies over the pyramids at Giza, Egypt, in 1943, preparing for attacks on Italy and southern Europe. Symbolic of the defense of Sevastopol, Crimea, is this Russian girl sniper, Lyudmila Pavlichenko, who, by the end of the war, had killed a confirmed 309 Germans, the most successful female sniper in history. Filmmaker Leni Riefenstahl looks through the lens of a large camera prior to filming the 1934 Nuremberg rally in Germany. The footage would be composed into the 1935 film Triumph of the Will, later hailed as one of the best propaganda films in history. Japanese women look for possible flaws in the empty shells at a factory in Japan on September 30th, 1941. Members of the Women's Army Corps pose at Camp Shanks, New York, before leaving for overseas duty on February 2nd, 1945. This is the first group of Black American Women's Army Corps to serve abroad. Women workers inspect a partly inflated barrage balloon in New Bedford, Massachusetts, on May 11, 1943. Each part of the balloon must be stamped by the worker who does the particular job, also by the work inspector of the division, and finally by the G inspector, who gives final approval. With some of New York's skyscrapers looming through clouds of gas, some U.S. Army nurses at the hospital post at Fort J, Governor's Island, New York, wear gas masks as they drill on defense precautions on November 27, 1941. 3 Soviet guerrillas are in action in Russia during World War II. An auxiliary territorial service girl crew, dressed in warm winter coats, works a searchlight near London on January 19, 1943, trying to find German bombers for the anti-aircraft guns to hit. German aviatrix, Captain Hannah Reitsch, shakes hands with German Chancellor Adolf Hitler after being awarded the Iron Cross Second Class at the Reich Chancellery in Berlin in April 1941, for her service in the development of airplane armament instruments during World War II. In the back center is Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring. At the extreme right is Lieutenant General Karl Bodenschatz of the German Air Ministry. Female students in Port Washington, New York, on July 8, 1942, are busily engaged in copying World War II propaganda posters. The master poster is hanging in the background. A group of young Jewish resistance fighters is being held under arrest by German SS soldiers in April or May 1943, during the destruction of the Warsaw Ghetto by German troops after an uprising in the Jewish quarter. More and more girls are joining the Luftwaffe under Germany's total conscription campaign. They are replacing men transferred to the army to take up arms instead of planes against the advancing Allied forces. Here, German girls are shown in training with men of the Luftwaffe on December 7, 1944. Specially chosen airwomen are being trained for police duties in the Women's Auxiliary Air Force. They have to be quick-witted, intelligent, and observant women of the world. They attend an intensive course at the highly sufficient police school, where their training runs parallel with that of the men. Keeping a man in his place, a Women's Auxiliary Air Force member demonstrates self-defense on January 15, 1942. The first Women Guerrilla Corps was formed in the Philippines. Filipino women, trained in their local Women's Auxiliary Service, were seen here hard at work practicing on November 8, 1941, at a rifle range in Manila. The Italian Maquis have been fighting fascist regimes since 1927, enduring hazardous conditions. Targeting Germans and fascist Italians, they battle in the snow-covered peaks of the French-Italian border. A schoolteacher from the Valley of Aosta fights alongside her husband in the White Patrol on January 4, 1945. Women of the Defense Corps form a V for victory with crossed hose lines at a demonstration of their abilities in Gloucester, Massachusetts on November 14, 1941. A nurse wraps a bandage around the hand of a Chinese soldier, while another wounded soldier limps up for first aid treatment during fighting on the Salween riverfront in Yunnan Province, China, on June 22, 1943. Women workers groom lines of transparent noses for the A-20J, attack bombers at Douglas Aircrafts in Long Beach, California, in October 1942. American film actress Veronica Lake illustrates what can happen to women war workers who wear their hair long while working at their benches in a factory somewhere in America on November 9, 1943. ACAC girls, members of the Auxiliary Territorial Service, ATS, run to action at an anti-aircraft gun emplacement in the London area on May 20, 1941, when the alarm is sounded. Two women of the German anti-aircraft gun auxiliary operate field telephones during World War II. Young Soviet girl tractor drivers of Kyrgyzia, now Kyrgyzstan, efficiently replace their friends, brothers and fathers who went to the front. Here, a girl tractor driver sows sugar beets on August 26, 1942. Mrs. Paul Titus, a 77-year-old air raid spotter of Bucks County, Pennsylvania, carries a gun as she patrols her beat on December 20, 1941. Mrs. Titus signed up the day after the Pearl Harbor attack. "I can carry a gun anytime they want me to," she declared. Steel-helmeted, uniformed Polish women marched through the streets of Warsaw to aid in the defense of their capital after German troops had started their invasion of Poland on September 16, 1939. Nurses are seen clearing debris from one of the wards in St. Peter's Hospital, Stepney, East London, on April 19, 1941. 4 hospitals were among the buildings hit by German bombs during a full-scale attack on the British capital. Life magazine photojournalist Margaret Bourke-White wears high-altitude flying gear in front of an Allied Flying Fortress airplane during a World War II assignment in February 1943. Polish women are led through woods to their executions by German soldiers sometime in 1941. These Northwestern University girls brave freezing weather to go through a Home Guard rifle drill on the campus in Evanston, Illinois, on January 11, 1942. As they await assignment to their permanent field installations, these Army nurses go through gas mask drills as part of the many refresher courses being given them at a provisional headquarters hospital training area somewhere in Wales on May 26, 1944. Movie actress Ida Lupino, a lieutenant in the Women's Ambulance and Defense Corps, is shown at a telephone switchboard in Brentwood, California on January 3, 1942. In an emergency, she can reach every ambulance post in the city. It is in her house, and from here she can see the whole Los Angeles area. The first contingent of US Army nurses to be sent to an Allied advanced base in New Guinea carry their equipment as they march single file to their quarter on November 12, 1942. With practically every member present, the US House of Representatives in Washington, D.C. hears its second woman speak, other than a member, as Madame Chiang Kai-shek, wife of China's Generalissimo, pleads for maximum efforts to halt Japan's war aims on February 18, 1943. US nurses walk along a beach in Normandy, France on July 4, 1944, after they had waded through the surf from their landing craft. They are on their way to field hospitals to care for the wounded Allied soldiers. A French man and woman fought with captured German weapons, as both civilians and members of the French Forces of the Interior took the fight to the Germans in Paris in August of 1944, before the surrender of German forces and the liberation of Paris on August 25th. A German soldier, wounded by a French bullet, is disarmed by two members of the French Forces of the Interior, one a woman during street fighting that preceded the entry of Allied troops into Paris in 1944. Elizabeth Lilo Gloden stands before judges on trial for being involved in the attempt on Adolf Hitler's life in July 1944. Elizabeth, along with her husband and mother, was convicted of hiding a fugitive from the July 20th plot to assassinate Hitler. The three were executed by beheading on November 30th, 1944. Their executions were much publicized later as a warning to others who might plot against the German ruling party. An army of Romanian civilians, men and women both young and old, dig anti-tank ditches in a border area on June 22, 1944, in readiness to repel Soviet armies. Miss Jean Pitcaithy, a nurse with a New Zealand hospital unit stationed in Libya, wears goggles to protect her against whipping sands on June 18, 1942. 62nd Stalingrad Army on the streets of Odessa, the 8th Guard of the Army of General Chuikov on the streets of Odessa, in April of 1944. A large group of Soviet soldiers, including two women in front, march down a street. A girl of the resistance movement is a member of a patrol to rout out the German snipers still left in areas in Paris, France, on August 29, 1944. The girl had killed two Germans in the Paris fighting 2 days previously. Grande Guillotte of Normandy, France, pays the price for being a collaborationist by having her hair sheared by avenging French patriots on July 10, 1944. A man at the right looks on with grim satisfaction at the unhappy girl. Women and children, some of over 40,000 concentration camp inmates liberated by the British, suffering from typhus, starvation, and dysentery, huddle together in a barrack at Bergen-Belsen, Germany, in April 1945. Some of the SS women, whose brutality was equal to that of their male counterparts, at the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp in Bergen, Germany, on April 21, 1945. A Soviet woman, harvesting a field torn by shells only a short time ago, shakes her fist at German prisoners of war as they march eastward under Soviet guard in the USSR on February 14, 1944. In June 2009, Susie Bain of Austin holds a 1943 picture of herself as a Women Air Force service pilot during World War II. Bain, one of 300 surviving women air service pilots, helped campaign for the Congressional Gold Medal, which was awarded to over 200 veterans on March 10, 2010. During the autumn of 1942, Soviet soldiers moved through the ruins of Stalingrad. On June 21st, the commander of a Cossack unit, stationed in the Kharkov region of Ukraine, observes his troops in action. Late in 1942, a German anti-tank gun crew prepares for combat on the Russian front. Captured in the winter of the same year, this image shows citizens of Leningrad drawing water from a broken pipe during the prolonged 900-day siege by enemy forces. Unable to capture Leningrad, now St. Petersburg, the Germans isolated the city, cutting off supplies, disrupting utilities, and relentlessly shelling it for over 2 years. In spring, residents of Leningrad bid farewell amid harsh conditions. The German siege caused severe starvation, and the lack of medical resources made illnesses and injuries even deadlier. Around 1.5 million soldiers and civilians died, while many evacuees perished from hunger, disease, or bombings. The photo shows the destruction caused by intense street battles during the occupation of Rostov. A German artillery column crosses the Don River on July 31st, using a pontoon bridge surrounded by wreckage and damaged materials. A Russian woman watches as buildings burn in her hometown. During the spring of 1942, a German soldier stands ready with a machine gun during the Battle of Stalingrad. On August 3rd, enemy soldiers cross a river in a tank. A bomb drops onto Stalingrad from a Nazi plane in late September 1942. 3 Russian war orphans stand amidst the ruins of their home, abandoned after their parents were taken as prisoners by the enemy forces. In Sevastopol, Ukraine, attack forces navigate through the debris of the Soviet fortress on August 4th. In October, Soviet soldiers fight through the ruins of the Red October factory in Stalingrad. On October 13th, Russian anti-tank crews prepare for battle against approaching German tanks. A Nazi Stuka dive bomber attacks Stalingrad in October. A German tank approaches a destroyed Soviet tank near a wooded area in Russia. German soldiers advance outside the city amidst heavy destruction. In autumn 1942, an enemy soldier raises a Nazi flag in downtown as the city remains under intense siege and Soviet forces threaten to encircle them. On November 24th, German Stuka bombers raid the factory district. An abandoned horse stands amidst the wreckage of Stalingrad, a silent witness to the devastation. A tank cemetery is seen in Rzhev on December 21st, 1942, with over 2,000 tanks in various states of disrepair. On December 28th, enemy troops pass through the ruins of a power station in Factory District. The remnants of Stalingrad, destroyed by relentless battles, can be seen in a photo from November 5th. On December 16th, 1942, a Red Army soldier fires his machine gun from the backyard of a destroyed house in besieged Leningrad. In January 1943, a Soviet T-34 tank moves through the square of fallen fighters in Stalingrad. Soviet soldiers in winter camouflage take positions on a rooftop in the city in January 1943. Russian soldiers take cover in rubble while engaging German forces in street combat. German soldiers engage in intense street fighting in early 1943. On March 3rd, Soviet soldiers, camouflaged against the snow, advanced through the Russian countryside. Soviet infantrymen advanced through snow-covered hills around Stalingrad, aiming to break the German siege of the city. The Red Army successfully encircled the Sixth Army, trapping around 300,000 Nazi soldiers in a tight pocket. By February of the same year, a Soviet soldier is seen guarding a captured German soldier. After months of being surrounded by Soviet forces in Stalingrad, the remnants of the Sixth Army surrendered, their ranks decimated by brutal combat and starvation, claiming the lives of approximately 200,000. On March 1st, Germany's Field Marshal Friedrich Paulus is shown at Red Army headquarters in Russia, where he was interrogated. Paulus became the first Nazi field marshal to be captured during the war, defying Hitler's orders to fight to the death or commit suicide in defeat. While in Soviet captivity, Paulus emerged as a vocal critic of the Nazi regime and later testified as a witness for the prosecution at the Nuremberg trials. Russian soldiers in a trench watch as a Russian T-34 tank moves across the battlefield during the Battle of Kursk. In June 1943, Soviet soldiers fire at German aircraft while lying on their backs during a battle in Russia. In mid-July 1943, Tiger tanks of the enemy army are seen in heavy combat south of Oral during the Battle of Kursk. From July to August 1943, the area around Kursk would become the site of the largest armored battles in history, with the deploying around 3,000 tanks by Germans to face over 5,000 Soviet tanks. On July 28th, vast formations of German tanks amass for a renewed assault on Soviet defenses during the Battle of Kursk. Despite months of preparation, the German forces were unable to achieve their goals, as the Soviets, foreseeing the attack, had constructed formidable fortifications. The defeat at Kursk marked a turning point, giving the Red Army a decisive advantage for the remainder of the war. German soldiers marched past a Tiger tank during the intense battles of the Kursk offensive. On July 23, 1943, Russian anti-tank crews advance under a smokescreen toward German positions in Russia. Captured Nazi tanks are shown on April 14th, southwest of Stalingrad. A Soviet lieutenant hands cigarettes to captured German prisoners in July near Kursk. The nearly destroyed city of Stalingrad, captured in late 1943 from the air, shows the aftermath of brutal months of warfare. Four Japanese transports, hit by both US surface vessels and aircraft, were beached and burning at Tassafaronga on November 16, 1942. Only these four transports reached Guadalcanal before being destroyed, marking a significant blow to the enemy forces. The torpedoed Japanese destroyer Yamakaze sank within 5 minutes after being struck on June 25th, with no survivors. The attack was swift and left no time for escape. American reconnaissance patrol on New Guinea on December 18th. Lieutenant Philip Winson, after losing one of his boots, made a makeshift one to continue the mission. An Australian soldier looks over New Guinea near Milne Bay on October 31st, where Japanese forces were defeated after a fierce battle, marking a turning point in the Pacific. Enemy bombers attack US warships and transporters on September 25, 1942, at an unknown Pacific location. The attack left significant damage to US ships. On August 24th, the USS Enterprise suffered heavy bomber attacks off the Solomon Islands, killing 74 men and damaging several aircraft. A breeches buoy transfers survivors from a US destroyer to a cruiser after a naval battle off the Santa Cruz Islands on November 14th. The operation helped rescue those in danger. Japanese prisoners captured by US forces on Guadalcanal on November 5th were taken for interrogation. Their capture was a critical move for the Allies. Wake Island under attack by US carrier-based planes in November 1943. The island's defenses were weakened after heavy bombings. US Marines sprint across a beach on Tarawa Island on December 2nd to take the enemy airport, facing fierce opposition from entrenched Japanese forces. Secondary batteries of an American cruiser form smoke rings as they blast Japanese positions on Makin Island in the Gilberts on November 20th, preparing for a full assault. Troops of the 165th Infantry advance on Butaritari Beach, Makin Atoll, on November 20th, after naval bombardment cleared the way, securing the island. US Marines advance against enemy positions during the Tarawa invasion in late November 1943. Only 146 Nazi soldiers were captured, a testament to their fierce resistance. Infantrymen of Company I await the order to advance on Vella La Vella Island front on September 13th. Their mission was critical to securing the Solomon Islands. 2 US A-20 Havoc bombers on a mission over Kokos, Indonesia, in July. One bomber was shot down after dropping its bombs, marking a loss in the air battle. Japanese craft flee during an American aerial attack on Tonalei Harbor, Bougainville Island, on October 9th. The strike was devastating to enemy forces in the area. The aftermath of the November 25th kamikaze attack on USS Essex, with firefighters and fragments scattered across the flight deck, showing the devastation caused. A US Marine patrol discovers a Japanese family hiding in a cave on Saipan on June 21, 1944. The family's discovery highlighted the dire situation faced by the civilians. Troop-packed LCIs follow a Coast Guard manned LST to Cape Sansapor, New Guinea. The operation was part of the Allied efforts to regain control over the region. A dive bomber is shot down near Truk on July 2nd. The gunner was still in the plane when it hit the water, demonstrating the risks faced by Japanese pilots. A rocket-firing LCI lays down a barrage on Peleliu on September 15th, as alligators churn toward the island defenses, preparing for a large-scale invasion. Parafrag bombs fall on a Japanese bomber at Buru Island, Dutch East Indies, on October 15, 1944, setting the plane aflame as the attack continues. General Douglas MacArthur wades ashore at Leyte, Philippines, on October 20th, after recapturing the island, fulfilling his promise to return. Smoke rises from Kowloon docks in Hong Kong after a surprise bombing on October 16th. Nazi fighters attack bombers overhead during the raid. A Japanese torpedo bomber is shot down by USS Yorktown on October 25th. The bomber was part of a larger wave attempting to strike US ships in the area. Landing barges filled with US troops head for Leyte, Philippines, in October 1944, as fighter planes battle overhead, providing air cover during the invasion. Former kamikaze pilot Toshio Yoshitake poses with fellow pilots before taking off on November 8th. He survived a shoot-down by an American warplane after the attack. A kamikaze pilot heads for the USS Essex on November 25th, moments before impact, bringing chaos to the deck. A kamikaze aircraft slams into the USS Essex on November 25th after being hit by anti-aircraft fire. The explosion rocked the ship and killed many. Following a tank, American infantrymen successfully secure an area on Bougainville, Solomon Islands, in March after Japanese forces infiltrated their lines, pushing them back. The battleship USS Pennsylvania leads a fleet into Lingayen Gulf ahead of the landing on Luzon, Philippines, in January 1945, as part of a critical strategic move. US Marines land at Iwo Jima on February 19th, with battleships in the background, initiating one of the most brutal campaigns of World War II. US Marines raise the American flag atop Mount Suribachi, Iwo Jima, on February 23rd, after 36 days of costly fighting, symbolizing victory and sacrifice. A US cruiser fires at Japanese positions on Okinawa in 1945, providing support for ground forces engaged in fierce combat. US invasion forces establish a beachhead on Okinawa on April 13th, with landing crafts and battleships in the background as intense fighting begins. 2 US Marines direct flamethrowers at Japanese defenses on Iwo Jima on March 4, 1945. The flames were used to neutralize entrenched positions on the island. An attack on a cave at Turkey on Iwo Jima destroys the structure, giving US Marines a clear view of the beachhead on April 2nd. In Honshu, Japan, the USS Santa Fe assists the USS Franklin after an enemy dive bomber attack on March 19th. Over 800 died in the attack. Corsairs from the Hells Bells Squadron are silhouetted against the sky during an air raid on Yonton Airfield on April 28th as intense air combat rages. In July 1943, Allied forces troops, guns, and transport rush ashore, ready for action, at the beginning of the Allied invasion of the Italian island of Sicily. An American cargo ship loaded with ammunition explodes after being hit by a bomb from a German plane off Gela on the southern coast of Sicily on July 31st. Over the body of a fallen comrade, Canadian infantrymen advance cautiously up a narrow lane in Campo Chiaro, Italy, on November 11th. The enemies had left the town as the Canadians advanced, leaving only sniper nests to slow their progress. While under heavy machine gun fire from the German coastal defense forces, American soldiers wade ashore off the ramp of a US Coast Guard landing craft during the Allied landing at Normandy, France, on D-Day, June 6, 1944. A Royal Air Force Baltimore light bomber releases a series of bombs during an attack on the railway station and junction in the snow-covered town of Sulmona, a crucial point on the east-west route across Italy in February. Nazi infantrymen take cover in a house in southern Italy on February 6th, waiting to attack after the Stukas had completed their work. Fifth Army artillery observers look over the German-held Italian town of San Vittore on November 1st, 1943, before launching an artillery barrage to drive out the enemies. Desolation fills the Italian city of Cassino in May 1944, the day after the city was captured by the Allies. Hangman's Hill, scene of intense fighting during the long siege, is visible in the background. A US reconnaissance unit searches for enemy snipers in Messina, Sicily, in August 1943. An Italian woman kisses the hand of a US Fifth Army soldier after troops advance into Naples and push northward through Italy on October 10th. US soldiers march past the Roman Colosseum and follow their retreating enemy in Rome, Italy on June 5, 1944. Lieutenant General Lucien K. Truscott, Jr., commanding general of the Fifth Army in Italy, speaks to African-American troops of the 92nd Infantry Division after repelling a German attack in the hills north of Viareggio. Mount Vesuvius erupts, spewing ash into the sky, as a US Army jeep speeds by shortly after the arrival of Allied forces in Naples, Italy. A low-flying Allied plane sends German soldiers scrambling for shelter on a beach in France before D-Day in 1944. The planes were taking photos of German coastal defenses in preparation for the upcoming invasion on June 6th. General Dwight D. Eisenhower delivers the order of the day, full victory, nothing else, to paratroopers in England on June 6th, just before they board their planes to take part in the first assault of the invasion of Europe. All the men with General Eisenhower are members of Company E. American troops march through the streets of a British port town on their way to the docks, where they will board landing craft for the D-Day assault in June. US Rangers aboard a troopship in an English port await the signal to sail to the coast of Normandy. Clockwise from the far left are First Sergeant Sandy Martin, who was killed during the landing, Technician 5th Grade Joseph Markovich, Corporal John Losciavo, and at the bottom, Private First Class Frank E. Lockwood. A section of the armada of Allied landing craft with protective barrage balloons heads toward the French coast in June 1944. Smoke billows from a US Coast Guard landing craft approaching the French coast on June 6th after German machine gun fire caused an explosion by setting off an American soldier's hand grenade. Canadian soldiers land on Courseulles Beach in Normandy on June 6th as Allied forces storm the Normandy beaches during D-Day. Some of the first assault troops to hit the beachhead in Normandy, France, take cover behind enemy obstacles to fire on German forces, while others follow the first tanks plunging through the water toward the German-held shore on June 6th. US reinforcements wade through the surf as they land at Normandy in the days following the Allies' June 1944 D-Day invasion of France. Members of an American landing party assist others whose landing craft was sunk by enemy action off the coast of France. These survivors reached Omaha Beach by using a life raft on June 6th. Canadian soldiers from the 9th Brigade land with their bicycles at Juno Beach in Bernier-sur-Mer during D-Day as Allied forces storm the Normandy beaches. American soldiers on Omaha Beach recover the dead after the June 6th. 13 Liberty ships, intentionally scuttled to form a breakwater for invasion vessels landing on the Normandy beachhead, lie in a line off the beach, shielding the ships inshore. The artificial harbor installation was prefabricated and towed across the channel. Allied troops unload equipment and supplies on Omaha Beach in Normandy, France, in early June. Tow planes and gliders fly above the French countryside during the Normandy invasion in June 1944, as part of an objective for the US Army 9th Air Force. Gliders and 2 planes are circling, with many gliders having landed in fields below. Reinforcements for the initial Allied invaders of France begin their march on June 18th in Normandy, with long lines of troops and supply trucks. On July 25th, American soldiers rush across a dirt road under enemy fire near Saint-Lô. Others crouch in a ditch before making the crossing. 5 wounded Germans, left without food or water for 3 days, hide in a Normandy farmhouse, waiting for a chance to surrender. Acting on information from a French couple, US soldiers go to the barn, but are attacked by snipers determined to prevent their capture. After a skirmish, the snipers are dealt with, and the wounded Germans are taken captive in France on June 14th. Helmets discarded by German prisoners who were taken to a prison camp lie in a field in Normandy, France, in 1944. Above the Netherlands, American tow planes with gliders strung out behind them fly high over a windmill in Valkenswaard, near Eindhoven, on September 25, 1944, on their way to support the Airborne Army in Holland. Parachutes open as waves of paratroopers land in Holland during operations by the 1st Allied Airborne Army in September. Operation Market Garden was the largest airborne operation in history, with about 15,000 troops landing by glider and another 20,000 by parachute. The haystack at right softens the landing for this paratrooper who tumbles during operations in Holland by the 1st Allied Airborne Army on September 24th. In France, an American officer and a French resistance fighter are engaged in a street battle with German occupation forces during the days of liberation in August 1944 in an unknown city. People attempt to cross a damaged bridge in Cherbourg, France on July 27th. An American version of a sidewalk cafe in Fallen, France. On July 15th, as Robert McCurdy from New Jersey, Harold Smith from Brush Creek, Tennessee, and Sergeant Richard Bennett from Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, raise their glasses in a toast. A view from a hilltop overlooking the road leading into St. Lo in July. Two French children in the foreground watch convoys and trucks of equipment move through their almost completely destroyed city en route to the front. Crowds of Parisians celebrating the entry of Allied troops into Paris scatter for cover as a sniper fires from a building on the Place de la Concorde. Although the Germans surrendered the city, small bands of snipers still remained on August 26th. After the French resistance staged an uprising on August 19th, American and Free French troops made a peaceful entrance on August 25th, 1944. Here, 4 days later, soldiers of Pennsylvania's 28th Infantry Division march along the Champs-Élysées with the Arc de Triomphe in the background. On December 27, 1944, B-24 bombers from the US 15th Air Force roar over Salzburg, Austria, as smoke from their bombs merges with enemy smudge pots. On the same day, a group of Hitler Youth in Germany is trained to use a machine gun, a stark reminder of the war's desperation. On December 24th, near Bra, Belgium, a soldier from the US 82nd Airborne Division advances alone while a comrade provides cover. On May 2nd, 1945, Yevgeny Khalday captured Soviet soldiers raising their flag over the Reichstag after Berlin's fall. Though iconic, the photo was a staged reenactment and stirred controversy over identities and edits. A heavily armed German soldier advances with ammunition boxes during the counter-offensive in the Belgium-Luxembourg salient on January 2nd. Along the Second Baltic Front, a Soviet machine gun crew crosses a river. One soldier raises his rifle, while others push a floating platform carrying their gun and supplies. On January 6th, C-47 transport planes fly low over Bastogne, dropping supplies to besieged US forces. As smoke rises from destroyed Nazi equipment, American tanks advance to support the fight. On January 9th, captured enemy soldiers stand amid the ruins of Bastogne after the US 4th Armored Division helped break the siege. Refugees gather in La Glaise, Belgium, awaiting transport after the town's recapture by American forces during the German advance in the Belgium-Luxembourg salient on January 2nd. On February 4th, British Prime Minister Winston Churchill, US President Franklin Roosevelt, and Soviet Premier Joseph Stalin sit on the patio of Livadia Palace in Yalta, Crimea, discussing Europe's post-war reorganization and Germany's fate. On February 5th, 1945, Soviet troops from the 3rd Ukrainian Front engage in combat through the buildings of Budapest, Hungary. This photo captures a V-1 bomb heading towards central London, hitting near Drury Lane and damaging buildings like the Daily Herald office. The final enemy strike on British soil occurred on March 29th in Datchworth. On February 12th in Berlin, Volksopfer collection depots gathered uniforms and equipment from German civilians to support the Volkssturm. The message urged citizens to sacrifice for the army and home guard, so soldiers could proudly wear a uniform. In Kranenburg, a party works to repair telephone lines amid 4-foot floods caused by the retreating Germans. British troops deeper in Germany had their supplies delivered by amphibious vehicles during the flooding on February 22nd. This set of 3 photos captures the reaction of a 16-year-old soldier after being captured by US forces in Germany. On March 3, 1945, flak bursts through the vapor trails of B-17 flying fortresses from the 15th Air Force during the attack on Graz's rail yards in Austria. From Dresden's town hall, this view shows the devastation of the Old Town after Allied bombings between February 13th and 15th, 1945. Over 3,600 aircraft dropped 3,900 tons of bombs, creating a firestorm that destroyed 15 square miles and killed more than 22,000 people. Men of the American 7th Army pour through a breach in the Siegfried Line, advancing toward Karlsruhe, on the road to Stuttgart on March 27th. On March 18th, Jewish services were held at Schloss Reit, led by US soldiers, Private First Class Abraham Mermelstein, Captain Manuel M. Polyakov, and Corporal Martin Willen. The service, the first east of the Ruhr River, honored fallen Jewish soldiers from the 29th Division, US 9th Army. American soldiers huddle aboard an assault boat crossing the Rhine at St. Goar while facing heavy fire from German forces. An unidentified American soldier, shot by a German sniper in Koblenz, clutches his rifle and hand grenade. On April 24th, the war-torn Cologne Cathedral stands amidst the devastation on the west bank of the Rhine in Cologne. The nearby railroad station and Hohenzollern Bridge are completely destroyed after years of Allied air raids. An American soldier from the 12th Armored Division stands guard over captured German soldiers in a forest in April 1945. On April 25th, just days before his suicide, Adolf Hitler decorates members of the Nazi youth organization Hitler Jugend in front of the Chancellery bunker in Berlin. In early April, partly completed Heinkel. He 162 fighter jets sit on the assembly line in an underground Junkers factory at Tartan. The factory, hidden in a former salt mine, was discovered by the 1st US Army during their advance on Magdeburg. In April 1945, Soviet officers and US soldiers meet on the Elbe River. Their friendly exchange highlights the Allied bond as the war draws to a close. During the 7th Army's drive toward Heidelberg, Germans are crammed into an overcrowded compound. This photo captures the Allies' perpetual struggle to provide enough space for their ever-growing collection of prisoners on April 4th. On April 18th, a US soldier stands amid rubble at the monument of the Battle of the Nations in Leipzig after the city's attack. The monument, a last stronghold, housed 150 SS troops with supplies for a 3-month holdout. American 1st Army artillery eventually forced their surrender. In April of the same year, Soviet soldiers engage in house-to-house fighting on the outskirts of Königsberg, East Prussia. In early spring 1945, a German officer eats sea rations amid the ruins of Saarbrücken, a key city along the Siegfried Line. In Prague, a Czech mother kisses a Russian soldier, overcome with emotion, as she thanks him for helping to free her homeland on May 5th. On May 1st, New York City's subway rush hour came to a halt as news of Hitler's death spread. The Nazi leader had committed suicide in his Berlin bunker on April 30th, and his successor, Karl Dönitz, vowed to continue the war against the Allies. On May 4th, Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery reviews the surrender pact at his headquarters in Lüneburg Heath. German officers agreed to a ceasefire on British fronts in northwest Germany, Denmark and Holland, starting May 5th. The surrender marked the beginning of the end, with full Nazi surrender on May 8th. On VE Day, May 8th, over 1 million people flooded Whitehall in central London to hear the official announcement of Germany's unconditional surrender. The streets were alive with celebration as the war in Europe came to an end. New York's Times Square is filled with crowds celebrating Germany's unconditional surrender in the war. The scene captures the city's joyous response to the end of the war in Europe on May 7th. On May 9th, Moscow's Red Square erupts in celebration of Victory Day. Fireworks light up the sky, followed by bursts of gunfire and searchlights, marking the Soviet Union's triumph in World War II. At the end of World War II, the wrecked Reichstag building in Berlin stands in ruins, with a destroyed military vehicle in the foreground, symbolizing the collapse of Nazi Germany. Soviet Ilyushin Il-2 ground attack aircraft soar above Berlin, as the city faces intense aerial bombardment during the final stages of World War II. In June 1945, Nuremberg lies in ruins after Allied bombings during World War II, destroying over 90% of the city. Once the site of Nazi rallies and the Nuremberg laws, the city would later host the Nuremberg trials, prosecuting Nazi leaders for war crimes, including the genocide of 10 million people. Around 1939 in Austria, German light machine gun corps members line up beside their bikes, their faces hidden behind gas masks. A mounted machine gun can be seen on one of the bicycles at the lower right. French troops move westward through a dense forest in France, advancing toward the front lines on September 25, 1939. Cyclists volunteered as messengers, aiding in air raid precautions. Merseyside's cycling clubs led the way, with 500 members joining the Messenger Corps. Liverpool, England. Photographed in England on July 29, 1941, this one-man anti-gas ambulance and resuscitator was specifically designed for the Home Guard's use. On April 20, 1939, German Bicycle Corps members took part in a grand parade celebrating Adolf Hitler's 50th birthday. Riding in formation, they passed by as part of the large-scale festivities held in his honor. On June 14, 1940, a Belgian family of 4 desperately pedals a tandem bike toward France, fleeing the advancing Nazi forces. With their belongings strapped to their backs, they race towards safety as war engulfs their homeland. The renowned Dutch Bicycle Regiment stands at attention on April 11, 1940, ready to speed toward the German frontier to protect Queen Wilhelmina's kingdom. With a blitzkrieg threat similar to the one that had just struck Norway and Denmark, they remain alert. Photographed just outside Amsterdam. On September 3, 1939, a policeman cycles through the streets of London, delivering a raiders past notice after the city's first air raid warning of the war. The air was tense as London braced for the looming threat, with the first signs of wartime disruption now a reality. Near the Dnieper River on the Russian front, a unit of German cyclists crosses a gangway of logs, constructed by engineers to facilitate their passage in August 1941. The makeshift bridge reflects the resourcefulness needed as the German forces advanced deeper into Soviet territory. On September 15th of the same year, Japanese troops march into Saigon, marking a significant step in their expansion during World War II. The city's capture signified the growing dominance of Japan in Southeast Asia. The bicycle taxi became the most common form of transport in Paris on June 1, 1941, under Nazi rule. Once known for their furious speed, the famous Parisian taxis had vanished due to the petrol shortage, with all fuel now directed toward the Nazi war effort. Taxi drivers now pedaled their passengers in these quaint contraptions, with one on the left carrying 3 travelers. 3 air cadets from the Royal Air Force's Coulsdon and Purley Squadron practice flying in formation on bikes with wings over the handlebars on September 29, 1942. This creative exercise helps them simulate aerial maneuvers in a fun and imaginative way. In 1942, members of the Hitler Youth, trained to report airstrikes, repair their bicycles. Their role was vital in ensuring communication during air raids, as they quickly cycled to deliver messages. On March 20th, due to restrictions on automobiles, gasoline, and rubber tires to conserve materials for the war effort, college students are turning to cycles as an alternative mode of transportation. Freshmen at Wellesley College are seen riding across the campus in Wellesley, Massachusetts. US Air Force pilots at a bomber command station in England use cycles to travel the mile-long tarmac from their headquarters to their giant planes, showcasing the practical use of bicycles in wartime logistics. On June 8, 1942. In 1943, soldiers of the Bicycle Patrol pushed their vehicles along a partly frozen lake on an alpine pass. Switzerland's narrow, hilly terrain makes bikes the most practical means of transportation in these challenging conditions. On December 22nd, members of the Women Army Corps stationed at a US medium bomber station in England ride their bikes on their way to work, reflecting the practical use of cycles during wartime for everyday tasks. A civil defense air raid warden stands beside a street sign during a blackout, circa 1943, maintaining vigilance and safety as cities brace for potential air raids. American servicemen ride a 5-seater bicycle in England on May 19, 1944, showcasing their resourcefulness and camaraderie amid wartime challenges. From left, Corporal Willis T. Anthony, Private First Class Emmett Shackelford, Private First Class Eugene Purdy, and Private First Class Horace Boykin, riding a bicycle. Pause from their duties on June in Saipan, Northern Mariana Islands, as they take a well-deserved break from supplying ammunition to the front line. On June 6th, Canadian soldiers from the 9th Brigade land at Juno Beach in Bernières-sur-Mer during D-Day, while Allied forces storm the Normandy beaches in a pivotal moment of World War II. On June 12, 1944, troops from Canada scramble down the gangway of a landing craft infantry of the Royal Canadian Navy into the surf near a town on the Normandy coast, carrying their cycles as part of the invasion of Europe. Thousands of American troops and armored vehicles took part in a grand parade in Paris on August 29th. As American troops paraded down the Rue de la Paix, they were watched and cheered by Parisians, many of whom rode their bicycles to the scene. Parisian people buy French flags on August 26th to celebrate the liberation of Paris as the city erupts in joy and pride over its newfound freedom. At a submarine refitting station in the United Kingdom, members of the British, French, Dutch, and Norwegian navies were able to rest and refit their submarines between long tours of duty. On August 31st, 1942, French sailors disembark with bikes they brought along in case they docked a long distance from their quarters. Lieutenant John W. Upchurch points a pistol at a German soldier leaving a hiding place in the cellar of a house in Oiselay, France, near the Swiss border, with stolen bicycles used by the fleeing Germans in the center on September 14, 1944. On September 19th, Nazi cycle troops, still carrying their arms, arrived to surrender in France, marking the end of their campaign in the region. On September 23rd, a group of Dutch men sought through a pile of bicycles abandoned by retreating German troops at one end of a bridge in Nijmegen, following its capture by Allied forces. A Soviet soldier looks across a war-damaged square in Budapest, Hungary, surveying the aftermath of the conflict in 1945. In 1945, a Russian soldier finds himself involved in a misunderstanding with a German woman in Berlin over a bicycle he wished to buy from her. On September 13th, a Japanese civilian pushes his loaded bike down a path cleared of rubble in Nagasaki, just 5 weeks after the city was struck by an American atomic bomb. On August 6, 1945, a mushroom cloud rises above Hiroshima after the Enola Gay dropped an atomic bomb. Around 80,000 people were killed instantly, with many more dying from injuries and radiation by 1950. A North American B-25 bomber makes a bomb run on a Japanese destroyer escort off the coast of Formosa, targeting the ship as part of the ongoing efforts to weaken Japan's naval forces during World War II. This aerial photograph shows the power needed to break Japanese resistance on Iwo Jima, with landing craft waiting to unload, small boats shuttling troops and wounded, and transports protected by a screen of warships. Marine tanks moved toward the first airfield on March 17, 1945. With his hands in the air, the first of 20 Nazi soldiers emerges from a cave on Iwo Jima, where they had been hiding for several days, on April 5th. This marks a key moment in the battle as Japanese forces, deeply entrenched, begin to surrender after intense fighting. On May 4, 1945, anti-aircraft gunners fire at a burning kamikaze plane plummeting toward the USS Sangamon's flight deck in the Ryukyu Islands near Japan. The plane crashes into the sea, but another later hits the deck, causing heavy damage. Flames leap from the deck of the USS Bunker Hill after it was hit by 2 kamikazes in 30 seconds off Kyushu on May 11th. The attack killed 346 and wounded another 264 aboard. Tanks of the 6th Marine Division probe the outskirts of Naha, the capital city of Okinawa. On June 13th, perched on the rim of a gaping hole in the wall of a theater in the Ryukyu capital, a Marine rifleman views the result of the American bombardment of Naha, Okinawa. Structure skeletons are all that remain of the city, which had a pre-invasion population of 443,000 people. A formation of Boeing B-29 superfortresses in 1945 flies over Mountain Fuji as part of the strategic campaign against Japan. The bombers soar high above the iconic mountain, marking a significant moment in the war. Flames spread through the city of Taramisa after incendiary bombing by the 499th Bomb Squadron. The destructive force leaves the city engulfed in flames, marking another chapter in the devastating aerial assaults of World War II. On August 1st, a night view reveals the devastation in Toyama, Japan, as 173 American B-29 bombers dropped incendiary bombs on the city. Once a major aluminum producer, the city was reduced to 95.6% destruction, with flames consuming everything in their path. After an incendiary bombing, a view of Tokyo shows the stark contrast between destruction and survival. A strip of residential buildings stands undamaged amidst the surrounding ashes and rubble of neighboring structures, which were either burned or blasted to the ground. In July 1945, the United States was nearing the completion of its most powerful and deadly weapon, the atomic bomb. Here, J. Robert Oppenheimer, director of Los Alamos, is seen in silhouette as he supervises the final assembly of the gadget, the first nuclear device to be detonated, at the Trinity test site in New Mexico. The expanding fireball and shockwave from the Trinity test explosion, observed just 0.025 seconds after detonation in the New Mexico desert on July 16th. Incendiary bombs are dropped from B-29 superfortresses of the U.S. Army Air Forces on June 4th, on already burning landing piers and surrounding buildings in Kobe, Japan. The terrible damage done to Tokyo by American bombers can be seen in what was once a residential district in the Japanese capital on September 10, 1945, viewed months later. Only large, well-constructed buildings remain intact. A U.S. Army Air Forces B-29 superfortress trails smoke and fire over Kobe. The city, a key industrial hub, faced widespread destruction as American bombers targeted vital military and industrial sites to hinder Japan's war efforts during World War II. After the Potsdam Declaration on July 26, 1945, demanding Japan's surrender, preparations for the atomic bomb were made. Here, the Little Boy bomb is positioned on a trailer, ready for loading onto the Enola Gay in August 1945. On August 6th of the same year, the B-29 bomber dropped the Little Boy bomb over Hiroshima. The explosion released a massive shockwave, firestorm, and radiation, devastating the city. Smoke rose 20,000 feet above Hiroshima, spreading out 10,000 feet at the base. The searing heat from the nuclear explosion above Hiroshima scorched the roadway of this bridge across the Otter River, about half a mile from the bomb's focal point. The areas shielded by the concrete pillars and railings remained undamaged, leaving permanent shadows on the bridge deck. Hiroshima survivors receive emergency treatment by military medics. August 6, 1945. The city was in chaos, reduced to rubble. Medics worked under difficult conditions, providing aid to the severely injured. Many survivors suffered burns, radiation sickness, and debris injuries. The shadow of a handle on a gasometer left an imprint after the atomic bomb explosion, 2 kilometers away from the hypocenter in Hiroshima. The intense heat from the explosion caused the gasometer's handle to cast a permanent shadow on the surface, creating a haunting reminder of the devastation. A Japanese soldier walks through a completely leveled area of Hiroshima in September of 1945, amid the ruins left by the atomic bomb explosion. The once thriving city now lay in rubble, with only a few structures remaining, showcasing the immense destruction caused by the bomb. Days after Hiroshima, the US readied the second nuclear weapon, Fat Man, in August. Following Japan's refusal to surrender, President Truman warned, "If they do not now accept our terms, they may expect a rain of ruin from the air, the like of which has never been seen on this earth." Fat Man was dropped from the B-29 bomber boxcar at 11:02 a.m. on August 9th, detonating at about 1,650 feet above Nagasaki. An estimated 39,000 people were killed instantly, with an additional 25,000 injured. This picture, taken shortly after the August 9th, 1945 atomic bombing, shows workers clearing debris in a devastated area of Nagasaki. The photo, obtained by the US Army from Domei, the official Japanese news agency, was the first ground view of the nuclear destruction in Nagasaki. The only recognizable structure remaining in Nagasaki is a ruined Roman Catholic cathedral on a destroyed hill. Dr. Nagai, a medical instructor and X-ray specialist at Nagasaki Hospital, was a victim of the atomic radiation from the nuclear bombing. He passed away a few days after this photo was taken. People walk through the charred ruins of Nagasaki shortly after an atomic bomb destroyed much of the city. The explosion reached an estimated heat of 3,900 degrees Celsius. On August 9, 1945, the Soviet Union invaded Manchuria, sending more than 1 million soldiers to attack Japan's Kwantung Army. The Soviets quickly defeated the poorly prepared enemy soldiers, putting further pressure on them to surrender to the Allies. A column of tanks moves through the streets of the Chinese city of Dalian. Soviet soldiers stand on the bank of the Songhua River in Harbin. The occupied city was liberated by Soviet troops on August 20th, 1945. By the time Japan surrendered, approximately 700,000 Soviet troops occupied Manchuria on this day. Enemy soldiers surrender their rifles while a Soviet soldier records information in a book. A Nazi prisoner of war at Guam, Mariana Islands, covers his face upon hearing Japanese Emperor Hirohito announce Japan's unconditional surrender on August 15th. World War II had come to an end. Sailors in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, listen to the radio and cheer as Tokyo Radio announces Japan's acceptance of the Potsdam surrender terms. A huge crowd in New York's Times Square celebrates the news of Japan's acceptance of the Allies' surrender terms on August 14, 1945. People cheered and danced, marking the end of World War II and the start of a new era of peace. Victory over Japan Day brought relief to millions around the world. On the same day, a sailor and a nurse share a passionate kiss in Manhattan's Times Square, celebrating the end of World War II. The iconic moment captured the joy and relief of the celebrations, symbolizing the end of years of conflict. On September 2, 1945, aboard the battleship Missouri, General Yoshijiro Umezu signed the instrument of surrender for Japan's military, after Foreign Minister Mamoru Shigemitsu signed for the government. Both were later convicted of war crimes. Umezu died in prison, while Shigemitsu was paroled in 1950 and served in government until his death in 1957. On the same day, dozens of F-4U Corsair and F-6F Hellcat fighter planes fly in formation over the USS Missouri during the World War II surrender ceremonies. American servicemen and women gather at the Rainbow Corner Club in Paris to celebrate Japan's unconditional surrender. An Allied correspondent stands amidst the radioactive rubble, in front of what was once an exhibition hall in Hiroshima, 1 month after the US dropped the first atomic bomb on the city. The explosion occurred almost directly above the dome. On December 1, 1945, in Aversa, Italy, German Wehrmacht General Anton Dostler is tied to a stake moments before his execution by a firing squad. The commander of the 75th Army Corps was sentenced to death by a United States military commission in Rome for ordering the execution of 15 unarmed American prisoners of war on March 26, 1944, in La Spezia, Italy. On June 24, 1945, during the Victory Day parade in Moscow, Soviet soldiers march with lowered standards of the defeated forces. This symbolic act marked the Soviet Union's triumph over Nazi Germany, a powerful display of victory and retribution. Near Yokohama, Japan, 2 gaunt but relieved Allied prisoners gather their few belongings after being freed from Japanese captivity on September 11, 1945. Rescued by an American Mercy Squadron of the US Navy, their frail bodies reflect the hardships they endured, but their faces show the joy of liberation. A Moscow railway station becomes a scene of triumph as victorious Soviet soldiers return home from war. Their weary faces bear the marks of battle, yet their eyes shine with the pride of victory and the relief of homecoming. On July 20, 1946, an aerial view of Hiroshima reveals a city still devastated by the atomic bomb, with only small signs of reconstruction amid the vast ruins. The slow rebuilding process is hindered by severe shortages of materials and equipment, leaving much of the city in desolation. Amid the scorched wreckage and rubble of what was once his home in Yokohama, a man surveys the devastation. The remnants of his life lie scattered, a stark reminder of the destruction left in the wake of war. Soviet photographer Yevgeny Kaldey stands with Soviet forces near the Brandenburg Gate in Berlin. Capturing a historic moment, Kaldey immortalizes the Red Army's victory as the city falls to the Allies in May 1945. A P-47 Thunderbolt of the US Army, 12th Air Force flies low over the crumbled ruins of what once was Hitler's retreat at Berchtesgaden on May 26th of the same year. Small and large bomb craters dot the grounds around the wreckage. Hermann Göring, former Luftwaffe leader and second-in-command of Nazi Empire, appears in a mugshot on November 5, 1945, at the Central Registry in Paris. After surrendering to US soldiers on May 9th, he was taken to Nuremberg for war crimes trial. In 1946, during the Nuremberg trials, Hermann Göring and other Nazi leaders, including Rudolf Hess, Joachim von Ribbentrop, and Wilhelm Keitel, were sentenced to death. Göring committed suicide before his execution, while Hess received life imprisonment, serving until his death in 1987. On September 14, 1945, many of Germany's captured new and experimental aircraft were displayed in London during Thanksgiving week. Among them was the Heinkel He-162 Volksjäger, a jet-propelled plane with a turbojet unit mounted above its fuselage, shown here in Hyde Park. 1 year after the D-Day landings in Normandy, enemy prisoners landscaped the first US cemetery at Saint-Laurent-sur-Mer, near Omaha Beach, France. This solemn task marks the aftermath of battle and the honoring of the fallen. In July 1946, Sudeten Germans make their way to the railway station in Liberec, in former Czechoslovakia, to be transferred to Germany. After the war, millions of German nationals and ethnic Germans were forcibly expelled from annexed and transferred lands, with an estimated 12 to 14 million involved, and 500,000 to 2 million dying during the expulsion. Jinpei Terravama, a survivor of the first atomic bomb ever used in warfare, retains scars from burns sustained in the Hiroshima explosion in June 1947. His injuries serve as a lasting reminder of the bomb's devastating power. Disabled buses, scattered across the streets of Tokyo, are being used to help relieve the acute housing shortage in the city, with Japanese people hauling the buses into a vacant lot to convert them into homes for their families, photographed on October 2nd, 1946. An American ground infantry soldier places his arm around a Japanese girl as they view the surroundings of Hibiya Park, near the Tokyo Palace of the Emperor, on January 21st, 1946. Their shared moment captures a scene of post-war connection amidst a changing Japan. This aerial view of the City of London around St. Paul's Cathedral shows bomb-damaged areas in April 1945. In July of the same year, 2 months after the Nazi capitulation, General Charles de Gaulle shakes hands with children in Lorient, France. The city, which housed a German U-boat base, had been almost completely destroyed, with 90% of it flattened due to heavy bombing during World War II. The super-transport ship General W.P. Richardson is docked in New York, with veterans of the European War cheering, many of whom fought in Africa, Salerno, Anzio, Cassino, and Italy's mountain warfare on June 7, 1945. This aerial file photo shows a portion of Levittown, New York, in 1948, shortly after the mass-produced suburb was completed on Long Island farmland. It became the first of many developments for soldiers returning home from World War II and a symbol of post-war suburbia in the US. On August 24, 1945, Rose Claire Leonard watches the first $100 television set, the first moderately priced receiver, at a New York department store. The 5 by 7-inch image marks the beginning of post-war mass production, leading to regular commercial programming by 1948. On May 25th, a US soldier examines a solid gold statue, part of Hermann Göring's private loot, discovered by the 7th US Army in a mountainside cave near Schönau am Königssee, Germany. The cave also contained priceless stolen paintings from across Europe. On November 20th, Mönchengladbach Cathedral stands amid the rubble in Germany, still in need of repairs. While some churches were completely ruined, this one managed to survive the devastation of the war. On May 21st, Colonel Bird, the commandant of Belsen Camp, ordered the last hut at Belsen concentration camp to be burned. A rifle salute was fired in honor of the dead, and as a flamethrower set the hut alight, a German flag and a portrait of Hitler went up in flames. On June 6, 1945, mothers walk their children to school through the streets of Aachen, Germany, for registration at the first public school opened by the US military government after the war. In April 1947, a general view of the International Military Tribunal for the Far East meeting in Tokyo is shown. The trial of 28 Japanese civilian and military leaders for war crimes had begun on May 3, 1946, resulting in 7 executions and prison sentences for others. In October 1945, Soviet soldiers march in northern Korea, following Japan's 35-year rule over the peninsula. After World War II, the Allies divided Korea for occupation, Soviets in the north and US forces in the south. The planned elections never took place, and both powers established separate states, leading to the Korean War in 1950, which ended with an armistice in 1953, though the two countries remained technically at war. Communist leader Kim Il-sung chats with a farmer from Chingshanli, Kangso County, South Pyongyang, in North Korea. In a photo from North Korea's official Korean Central News Agency. On March 26, 1946, soldiers of the Chinese Communist 8th Route Army drill at Yan'an, the capital of the area governed by the Chinese Communist Party. These soldiers belong to the Night Tiger Battalion. After years of conflict with the Kuomintang, the two sides fought a common enemy during World War II, but resumed their civil war after the Soviet Union withdrew from Manchuria. The KMT was eventually defeated, leading to the establishment of the People's Republic of China in 1949. The electronic numerical integrator and computer, the first general-purpose electronic computer, was revealed to the public. Weighing 30 tons and developed at the University of Pennsylvania, it was initially built for calculating artillery tables. Its inventors later promoted the technology through influential lectures at the university. On July 25th, the US detonated a 40-kiloton nuclear bomb, codenamed Baker, at Bikini Atoll in the Marshall Islands. The explosion, part of Operation Crossroads, occurred 27 meters underwater, 3.5 miles from the atoll, with 73 ships, including the Japanese battleship Nagato, used to study nuclear effects on naval vessels. In 1946, Northrop's XB-35 flying wing bomber flew as an experimental heavy bomber for the US Army Air Force. Despite its innovative design, the project was terminated shortly after World War II due to technical difficulties. On September 21, 1945, Japanese ammunition was dumped into the sea during the US occupation. Most of Japan's war industry and armament were dismantled in the aftermath of World War II. On June 28, 1946, unidentified Nazi workers in decontamination clothing destroyed toxic bombs at the US Army Chemical Warfare Service Depot in St. Georgen, Germany. The disposal of 65,000 deadweight tons of German toxins, including mustard gas, was carried out by either burning or dumping the empty shells and bombs into the North Sea. On March 28th, the new cemetery at Belsen, Germany, was established to bury 13,000 individuals who died after the Belsen concentration camp was liberated. On July 15, 1945, Jewish survivors of the Buchenwald Nazi concentration camp, still in their camp clothing, stand on the deck of the refugee ship Mataroa at Haifa port during the British Mandate of Palestine. Many Jewish refugees were attempting to enter Palestine, despite British immigration restrictions, as tensions rose toward the establishment of Israel. On September 11, 1946, some of Poland's thousands of war orphans are seen at a Catholic orphanage in Lublin, where they are being cared for by the Polish Red Cross. The American Red Cross provided most of the clothing, vitamins and medicines to support their recovery. On April 13th, the Empress of Japan visits a Catholic orphanage in Fujisawa, Tokyo, where Japanese nuns care for children who lost their parents in the war and air raids. The children wave Japanese flags to greet the Empress, who inspects the grounds and visits the chapel. On March 11th, new buildings rise from the ruins of Hiroshima as part of the government's reconstruction program. Single-story homes line a new highway, while damaged masonry buildings in the background stand as remnants of the first atomic bomb ever used in warfare. Photo taken on June 25th. Clocks are readied for export to Allied countries as collateral for goods Japan needed. 34 factories produced 123,000 clocks in April 1946. On June 9th, US General George S. Patton acknowledges the cheers of thousands during a parade in Los Angeles. Shortly after, he returned to Germany, where his controversial stance on employing ex-Nazis led to his relief from command. Patton later died in December from injuries sustained in a traffic accident. The famous Iwo Jima flag-raising photograph by Joe Rosenthal is visible on a war bonds billboard. In 1945, German women clear debris on Berlin's Tauentzienstraße, with the ruins of the Kaiser Wilhelm Church in the background. Due to the absence of able-bodied men, civilian women, known as Trümmerfrauen or rubble ladies, took on the responsibility of clearing the wreckage. The signs on the left indicate the border between the British-occupied and US sectors of the city. On September 9, 1948, 250,000 anti-communists protested in Berlin's Republic Square, near the ruined Reichstag, against the Soviet-imposed Berlin blockade. In response, the Allies launched the Berlin Airlift, which continued until the blockade ended in 1949, leading to the division of Germany. The protest ended in clashes with Soviet troops, resulting in 2 German deaths. In March 1974, Hiro Onoda, a former Japanese army officer, emerged from the jungle of Lubang Island in the Philippines, 29 years after World War II ended. Believing the war was still ongoing, he and his comrades had carried out guerrilla activities. After meeting a Japanese traveler, Onoda was relieved of duty by his former commander. He returned to his country, having killed 30 Filipinos during his time in hiding, but was pardoned by President Ferdinand Marcos. Thanks for watching until the end. If you enjoyed these historical World War photos, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave your thoughts in the comments below. See you in the next video.